Nadia Osei was running before the first stall crashed to the ground. She had learned, over 18 months of owning Biscuit, to distinguish his bray by frequency and volume alone. The low grumble meant mild interest, usually in something edible, and usually in something that did not belong to him. The medium pitch meant he had already found the edible thing and was in the process of consuming it. The foghorn-level blast she heard from 3 rows away at Millhaven's Saturday market was the one she feared most, the sound he reserved for his most spectacular moments, the one that meant he had already committed to a course of action and was simply announcing it to the world before following through. By the time she pushed through the crowd, using her elbows without apology, 2 vegetable displays had gone sideways, and a basket of apples was distributing itself freely across the cobblestones in every direction. Biscuit stood in the center of the main aisle, with a length of blue ribbon tangled around his left ear, and the expression of an animal who had accomplished something significant and was waiting for the appropriate acknowledgement. Biscuit, she kept her voice flat. Flat was the only register that worked with him. Any deviation, frustration, affection, desperation, and he filed it away for future use. Do not move. He moved. 3 slow, deliberate steps to the left, directly into a ceramic display, and then turned his head to look at her, as though she were personally responsible for what had just happened. The crash brought Gerald out from behind his stall with the speed of a man who had been waiting for exactly this. Gerald was a wide, red-faced individual who sold hand-thrown pottery at the market every Saturday, and who had carried a quiet, specific grievance against Nadia since the previous spring, when she had parked in his spot one time by accident. He had never let it go. He never would let it go. He shouted at her now, with the energy of a man releasing months of accumulated feeling, all of it directed through the specific misfortune of broken ceramics on a Saturday morning. The apple seller joined in from the adjacent stall. The woman who sold herbal teas 3 rows down simply watched with the flat expression of someone who had witnessed this scene before, different Saturday, same donkey, and had made a private peace with her role as a witness. Nadia grabbed Biscuit's rope, steered him away from the remaining ceramic pieces, and began apologizing to anyone within a 5-meter radius, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this multiple times. She reached into her coat pocket for the folded emergency fund she kept there specifically for Biscuit-related market incidents. She had started keeping it 7 months ago, after the second incident, when it became obvious this was not a one-time problem, but a permanent operational cost. She paid Gerald twice what the pots were worth. He accepted the money without satisfaction, which was the best available outcome, and she moved on. The truth was, she had not meant to own a donkey. She explained this to people when the subject arose, and they never fully believed her, which she understood, given the evidence. But it was entirely true. 4 years ago, Nadia had left a large city where she had spent 6 years in a logistics office, coordinating transport for a company she did not think about anymore. The work had been fine, the apartment had been fine, the social life she had constructed around the work had been fine. Everything had been fine, and one afternoon she looked up from her screen at the window overlooking another building and understood that she was 33 years old and could not identify a single thing in her daily routine that she had chosen because she genuinely wanted it, rather than because it was the sensible next step in a sequence of sensible steps she had been following since university. That recognition had sat in her chest for 3 months before she did anything about it. Then she had done something about it, which was the part that surprised people who knew her, though she thought it should not have, because she had always been the kind of person who, once she understood a thing, did something about it. She paid off her debts, saved money with specific discipline, and found the farm at the edge of Millhaven in a listing that described it as a project with potential. She bought it, moved in with her practical shoes and her notebook and her complete absence of farming experience, and spent the first year learning everything she needed to learn and making the mistakes that could not be avoided. By the second year she knew the soil and the seasons and the animals. By the third year she knew herself again, or a version of herself she had not previously met but recognized as more accurate than the previous versions. Biscuit had arrived during the second year, through a mechanism she still could not fully account for. She had gone to a livestock auction with the specific intention of buying a pair of goats she had researched. She had a notebook with questions and a budget that was firm and sensible intentions she fully intended to honor. Then a donkey had been led into the lot, a large, unhurried animal with dark eyes and the settled expression of a creature that had opinions about most things, and had learned to keep them to himself until the right moment. He had spent the first 3 minutes of his time in the lot attempting to untie the auctioneer's right shoe with his teeth, with considerable focus and near success. Nobody bid on him. The hall went quiet, with the collective agreement of a group of people who had decided, without discussion, to let someone else handle this. Nadia raised her hand. She did not know, in the moment, why she raised it. She had decided, and analyzed, and concluded before the auction started, and her hand went up anyway, which told her something about herself that she spent several days afterward examining. She called him Biscuit on the drive home, partly for the biscuit-colored patch on his left shoulder, and partly because calling him something ordinary felt like the right countermeasure against an animal who was clearly going to be extraordinary in the wrong directions. She was correct about that. He had dismantled her garden gate on the 4th day. He had located the oats in her kitchen, and helped himself with the entitlement of an animal who felt the boundaries between spaces were advisory rather than firm. He had destroyed 2 market stalls before this morning's 3rd incident, flooded Fred's water trough on 3 separate occasions that Fred had catalogued with the patience of a man keeping a record for future reference, and once spent an entire afternoon making a sound of such unbroken misery that Dot had come over from next door, genuinely concerned that someone required assistance. But he was hers, and she did not regret him, standing in the ruins of Gerald's Saturday morning. She had examined the question honestly many times, and the answer was always the same. She did not regret him. Not once. Not really. There was something in his complete indifference to consequences, his total certainty about his own judgment, his absolute lack of interest in whether anyone approved of him or not, that she found, in some part of herself she did not fully examine in direct light, quietly inspiring. She tied him to the post at the far edge of the market, the post specifically chosen for its distance from anything breakable or edible, and went to set up her own stall. 3 rows of dried herb bundles, 2 varieties of goat milk soap she made herself, and the painted sign Fred had made for her the previous spring, in the careful, slightly lopsided handwriting of a man who was good at most things, and not quite at calligraphy. She arranged everything with the ease of 4 years of repetition. She liked these hours, the Saturday rhythm, the market smell of bread and pine, and always someone frying something somewhere, the particular quality of the light at this altitude and season. Dot, her left-hand neighbor at the market every Saturday for 3 years, handed her a cup of tea from the thermos she brought without fail. Dot was somewhere in her 60s, with gray hair. She wore pinned efficiently, and an opinion on everything she had ever encountered, delivered without invitation, and without apology, which Nadia had initially found exhausting, and had long since come to depend on. Saw the pot situation from where I was sitting, Dot said. Gerald will be making a sign, Nadia said. It will say no donkeys, and it will mean me specifically. Gerald already had that sign in his mind, Dot said, with the comfortable certainty of someone who had observed Gerald for a long time. He was just waiting for the occasion. She settled in her chair and turned her attention toward the main road, where the particular alertness she wore when she was tracking something interesting had begun to animate her face. Have you noticed the convoy vehicles this week? The summit preparations? The Alpha King's people have been coming through since Thursday. There are more today. You can tell by the registration markings if you know what to look for. Nadia looked toward the main road. Several black vehicles had passed during the morning. Clean, composed, moving with the efficiency of things that belonged to people who were not accustomed to waiting for anything. I mentioned the summit, Dot said, reading her expression, 3 weeks ago, and again last Tuesday. You mentioned many things, Nadia said. I mentioned this one in detail, Dot said, with the patient emphasis of a woman who had accepted that some information required multiple attempts. Pack leaders from the entire region, territorial agreements that have been in negotiation for years. The Alpha King himself is attending, not just representatives. It is the first time he has come to Millhaven personally. The lodge outside town has been in preparation since Monday. Good for the town's economy, Nadia said. That is the least interesting possible response to a regional summit happening at the edge of town, Dot said. My interest in things is proportional to how directly they affect me, Nadia said. Right now, they are affecting me less than these herbs. Dot made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh, and turned her attention back to the road. Nadia sold steadily through the morning, the woman who bought rosemary every second week, the man who needed too long to choose between soap varieties and always made the right choice anyway. A farmer from the next valley wanting bulk dried herbs for his wife, and a girl of about 9 who bought a small jar of lavender with coins she counted out one by one with the seriousness of someone conducting an important negotiation, and to whom Nadia quietly added a second jar at no charge, because that level of seriousness deserved recognition. By 11, the crowd had thickened, and the light was warm and clear, and Nadia had entirely stopped thinking about summits or convoys or alpha kings. She was talking to a farmer from the next valley about time quality and whether this year's late rain had affected the oils when the market sound changed. Not dramatically, no shouting, no sudden movement, but the ambient noise of 200 people going about their Saturday lowered and shifted direction at once, the collective adjustment of a crowd that has become aware of something in the same direction at the same moment. Nadia looked up. 3 black vehicles moved along the main road at the deliberate pace of things that did not hurry, because nothing in their experience had ever required them to. The market parted around them automatically, stalls edging back by a few centimeters, conversations pausing, the instinctive accommodation that crowds made for concentrated power, whether they intended to make it or not. "That is the main convoy," Dot said behind her. "That will be him in the lead vehicle." Nadia watched for 3 seconds, long enough to see the vehicles move, to register the quality of how they moved, the particular composed authority of their passage through the market space. Then she turned back to the farmer and continued talking about time, because the time was directly relevant to her week, and the convoy was not. At noon she packed her crates and went to collect Biscuit. He was standing at his post with his head slightly drooped, and his eyes 3/4 closed, appearing to be asleep. She had learned not to trust this. Biscuit's periods of apparent calm were not rest. They were the intervals between events, the quiet in which the next development was being prepared without any visible sign of preparation, which was, she had come to understand, his most effective mode. "Straight home," she told him, untying his rope. "Field Road. Not through the market, not through the high street, not past Gerald's stall, not past anything breakable. Directly home, directly to your shed. This is not a negotiation." He looked at her with large, attentive, completely opaque eyes. She took his rope and started walking. The route she had selected ran along the southern edge of the market and then followed the road's shoulder east out of town, a route she had taken every Saturday for 4 years without incident, wide and clear and unambiguously correct. It also, as it turned out, ran parallel to the road the convoy was using to exit the town. She heard the vehicles before she could see them, a low, steady sound coming around the bend ahead. She moved immediately to the left, pulling Biscuit firmly with her, giving them both well more than enough space on the verge for the vehicles to pass without difficulty. Biscuit stopped. She pulled. He did not move. She pulled harder. He leaned into the rope with his full body weight and planted all 4 hooves with the specific, settled finality of an animal that had reached a decision and was not entertaining revisions. "Biscuit," she used the flat, precise tone she reserved for genuine communication, as opposed to commands, which he did not distinguish from background noise. "Off the road. Now. Please. I am asking you clearly and directly." He looked at the road ahead. He looked at her. Then he took 3 deliberate steps, not sideways, not backward, but forward, directly into the center of the lane, and stood there with the expression of an animal who had assessed the situation and arrived at a position he was comfortable with. The lead vehicle came around the bend and stopped. So smoothly she barely registered the brakes. She stood with the rope in both hands, looking at the large black vehicle sitting 20 meters away, and thought, this will be brief and embarrassing and over. She grabbed Biscuit's rope with both hands and pulled. Nothing. She moved to his left shoulder and pushed with both palms against the solid, warm wall of him. He allowed it and did not shift. She planted her feet and put her whole body weight into it. He swayed approximately 2 centimeters in the direction of the road's center. She was still pushing when she heard a door open. The footsteps that crossed the gravel toward her were even and unhurried, not rushed, not aggressive, the footsteps of a person who had made a decision to approach and was following through on it at their own pace. She straightened up and turned. The man who had come out of the lead vehicle was tall, in dark clothes that were simple and well-made, and said nothing about themselves. He stood at a deliberate, measured distance. close enough to speak without raising his voice, far enough that the space between them remained entirely hers. He looked at Biscuit first, briefly and without alarm. Then he looked at her with the same quality of attention, steady and direct and not unkind, and notably, not impatient. The not impatient was what surprised her. She was blocking a convoy with a donkey. Impatience was the reasonable response. His face was lean and composed. Not the composed look of someone managing an expression, but the more fundamental composure of someone who had been dealing with significant things long enough that his default state was simply steady. He was younger than she would have expected, for someone with a convoy and the space-claiming authority of power. His eyes were dark and had a quality she would take time to find the word for, present, in a way that most people's eyes were not. Here, in this moment, rather than partially somewhere else. "Is this your animal?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I apologize. He makes choices I cannot reliably predict or prevent." "Does he respond to anything?" "Not reliably." She pulled the rope again with both hands. Biscuit turned his head and examined the convoy with what appeared to be genuine intellectual interest, ears forward. "He has specific views about roads. I have been unable to understand the pattern." The man looked at Biscuit for a moment. He did not laugh, but something very small and very controlled in the set of his expression acknowledged the situation without judgment. One of the convoy's guards had come forward to stand at the road's edge, uncertain whether to intervene or hold his position. Behind the lead vehicle, 2 more vehicles had stopped and were waiting with the patience of things that were accustomed to waiting. Nadia could see people gathered on the pavement at the road's edge, and she registered, with the specific sinking weight of a particular kind of embarrassment, that several of them had their phones out. She did not stop to think about that. She had a donkey to move. She walked around to Biscuit's front, placed both palms flat against his chest, and pushed. She spoke to him, in the low, reasoning voice she used when she was actually appealing to him, rather than giving orders that he was going to ignore. "Biscuit, please, off the road. Right now. I am asking you directly and sincerely. I will give you the good oats tonight. Double feeds this week. I am begging you. Please move off this road." He did not move, but he looked at the man standing on the road's edge with what appeared to be considered attention, and the man looked back at him, and there was something almost conversational in the exchange that Nadia found deeply, personally irritating. Then a camera flash went off from somewhere in the gathered crowd. Biscuit exploded sideways. Not forward, not backward, sideways, with a full-body jolt that redistributed his considerable weight all at once in one direction. The rope went taut with a snap, and Nadia's feet left the gravel briefly. She stumbled forward, caught nothing, stumbled again, and then the rope went slack because Biscuit had stopped, having decided the sideways direction was sufficient, and Nadia had no remaining resistance to stop her own momentum. She collided with the man. He caught her, both hands, one at her shoulder, one at her upper arm, the immediate and certain grip of someone whose reflexes were fast, and whose response to a sudden physical event was pure steadiness. She grabbed the front of his jacket with both hands by reflex, knuckles going white, and for one completely motionless second, they stood in the center of the road, with her hands on his jacket, and his hands on her arms, and Biscuit braying his triumphant announcement somewhere to her right. She recovered. She straightened. He released her at exactly the same moment she released him. "I am so sorry," she said, stepping back, the heat of genuine embarrassment reaching her ears. "He spooked. He doesn't usually, well, he does do things like this, but not usually this specifically." "Are you all right?" he said. His voice was entirely level. "Yes," she said. "Yes. I'll get him off the road right now. I'm very sorry." She went after Biscuit, who had stopped on the far verge and was eating the roadside grass with the focused, contented attention of an animal that had completed its morning's business and was now simply enjoying the results. She grabbed his rope, walked him firmly off the road and onto the shoulder, and did not look back at the man, or the convoy, or the phones. She walked home. Her face was hot. Her hands were not entirely steady from the rope tension. She had not asked his name. She had been too embarrassed, and it had seemed in the moment like a completely ordinary sequence of events. A road obstruction, a senior guard or driver who had come to see about it, a donkey being unreasonable on a specific road. The kind of thing that would be a brief and mortifying story she told Fred over tea on a weekday morning. She found out when she was home, when Dot appeared at her gate 40 minutes later, with wide eyes and her phone held at arm's length, like something that needed to be shown rather than described. The photograph was very clear. It had been taken at precisely the right moment, from precisely the right angle, with the specific luck that unplanned photographs sometimes had. Better framed than anything arranged could have been. It showed Nadia mid-stumble, her hands gripping the jacket of a man who stood very straight and tall, with both hands on her arms, and was looking at her with an expression that, in the photograph, at that angle, without any context to explain it, could only be read as something deeply and specifically personal. The convoy spread out behind them on the mountain road, the gravel, the stopped vehicles, the mountain in the background, all of it present and visible, and lending the image a clarity it had no right to have. It looked nothing like what it had actually been. It looked like a man who had stepped deliberately out of a convoy to catch the one person he could not let fall. "Nadia," Dot said, with the careful, measured tone she used for genuinely significant news. "Do you know who that is?" Nadia looked at the photograph for a long moment. She looked at the composed, dark-eyed face of the man in the image. She thought about the quality of his footsteps on the gravel. She thought about the not impatient that had surprised her. She thought about what Dot had said at the market about a man who did not simply look the part of authority, but simply was it. She knew. She turned around and looked at Biscuit, who was standing at the entrance of his shed in the gold afternoon light, watching her with both eyes forward and both ears tilted toward her. "Biscuit," she said. He blinked once. "Do you understand what you have done today?" He turned around, walked into his shed, and went to sleep. She stood in her yard as the light shifted toward evening, and her phone began filling with messages from people she knew and people she had never heard of, all of them sharing the same image, all of them building their own version of what it meant, turning 3 chaotic minutes on a mountain road into the beginning of a story she had not agreed to be in. She looked at the mountains in the distance, where the summit lodge sat quietly against the skyline. She thought, there is no possible way this gets worse. She lay in her yard, mentally composing the list of people she would have to explain this to. Fred, who would listen without comment and then fix something on the farm in quiet solidarity. Dot, who would not listen quietly at all. The woman from the herbalist 3 stalls down, who had been witness to too many Biscuit incidents and deserved at least an explanation for this one. Gerald, who she was not going to explain anything to, because Gerald was not owed her explanations, and also because Gerald would store whatever she said and use it against her eventually. She looked at the photograph again. The thing that made it travel was the specific quality of his expression. She could see it now, from outside herself, from the perspective of someone who did not know what had actually happened. He looked, in that image, like a man who was looking at someone he could not afford to lose his grip on. It was in the hands especially, the deliberateness of them, the immediate certainty, and in the quality of his attention, which the camera had captured at an angle that made it look personal, in a way that personal attention between strangers in the middle of a road crisis simply did not look. She put her phone face down and looked at the shed where Biscuit was sleeping. She thought about what it meant that she had agreed, not to the arrangement. She had already thought through the arrangement several times and understood why she had said yes to it. What she was thinking about now was the moment at the gate when he had said asking, the specific plainness of that word. She had met a lot of people who wanted things from her over the years, and most of them had dressed the wanting in other clothing, in logic, in benefit, in appeal to her self-interest or her better nature. Very few of them had simply said, "I am asking. This is what I need. Will you help?" She had found it, in that moment, impossible to say no to the plainness of it. Not because she was weak about plain asking. She was not weak about very much. But because plain asking was so rare that it deserved to be met with something equally plain. She had not sorted out yet whether that something was yes or no, but she had known immediately that it deserved an honest answer rather than a deflection. The honest answer, she thought now in the dark of her yard in the evening light, had been yes. She had said yes for the right reasons. The farm's needs, the bounded time, the word asking, all of those were real. But they were also, she was honest enough with herself to admit, cover for a simpler thing. She had wanted to see what was inside the summit. She had been curious. She had always been curious, and she had been directing the curiosity at herbs and goats for 4 years, and something in her had recognized an invitation to direct it somewhere else for a while. She was glad she had. She was very glad. She looked at the mountains. She looked at the shed. "Biscuit," she said. He did not respond, which was his response. She had, in 18 months, never once seriously considered selling him. She had considered it briefly and theoretically on 3 occasions: the gate incident, the second market, and the afternoon of the sustained miserable sound. But serious consideration had never followed the theoretical. He was hers, and she was his, in the specific, unromantic, consistently inconvenient way of things that belong to each other. She could not find it in herself to regret him, even now, looking at a photograph that had upended her entire ordinary week. She was wrong. She discovered this at 5 the next morning. The internet moved faster than sense, and Nadia had understood this as an abstract principle for years, without ever expecting to become a living example of it. She woke at 5 in the morning to 43 unread messages, 1 missed call from Fred, who had never called her, who communicated exclusively through fence-side appearances, and a notification on a social app she had nearly forgotten she still had, showing a number she had not known that application was capable of displaying. She sat up in the dark of her bedroom and looked at her phone with the specific, careful attention of someone approaching something that might be worse than expected. The photograph had moved, not merely shared. It had built momentum through pack networks and regional feeds and the general interest channels that fed on images containing recognizable power and unreadable emotion. It was the kind of image that people felt they understood before they had thought about it, the kind that created a feeling in the person seeing it, and that they passed on because of the feeling, rather than because of any particular thought. The comments ranged from questions about who she was and where this had been taken, to elaborate theories about secret relationships maintained across territorial lines, to interpretations of the expression on his face that were so detailed and so confident that she wondered, briefly, if the people writing them had access to information she did not. The expression on his face in the image was what had traveled, not her. A stranger in the middle of a road. Not the donkey, though the donkey helped because the donkey was genuinely funny, and funny moved fastest. It was him. The specific fraction of unmanaged attention in his eyes that the camera had caught at that angle, the thing that looked, to everyone who saw it, like something he had not intended to show, something that had slipped past the control he was otherwise known for. Nadia read 12 comments, closed the app, set the phone face down, and sat in the dark thinking practically. She was a practical person, in the specific sense that she was oriented toward the shape of a problem before the feeling about it. Not cold, not unfeeling, but organized in her response to things. The shape of this problem was clear. The photo existed. It was in motion. She could not stop it. The only question was whether it was the kind of thing that faded in 10 days, or the kind that required active response. She got up, fed every animal that required feeding, and made tea. She did not look at her phone again for 45 minutes. Fred appeared at her fence at 7, which told her everything she needed to know about how large the situation had become. Fred was a quiet, self-contained man in his mid-50s, who had farmed the land adjacent to hers since before she arrived, and who appeared at the fence at predictable intervals. Sunday mornings, he did not appear before 9, and he certainly did not call. The fact that he had done both meant the situation was beyond a passing story. "You saw it," he said. "Enough of it," she said. "Dot was awake from 3 o'clock, he said. "She wanted me to tell you that she is on your side unconditionally and completely, whatever that means in practical terms. It means she wants to know everything, and has already decided I was right," Nadia said. "That sounds accurate," Fred said. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the fence post, with the expression he had when he was selecting words. "It is bigger than you would expect from something that happened on a road," he said. "A lot bigger." "It is not the road," she said. "It is who he is." Fred nodded once and said nothing else, which was how he handled information that he understood and did not need to elaborate on. Cyrus Vale was not a man people were indifferent to. He had taken leadership of the Iron Vale Pack at 23, under circumstances that different parts of the region described differently depending on their relationship to the events. He had governed for 6 years since with a precision that his pack found reliable and his neighbors found quietly watchful making, the kind of governance that was effective without being comfortable for anyone who might have cause to negotiate against it. He did not make public appearances he did not need to make. He did not discuss his personal life in any context. He had not, in 6 years of documented public life, been photographed in a moment that looked personal, until yesterday. Nadia was still thinking about this at 9:30, when she heard a vehicle on the road outside. Not Fred's truck. She knew that engine. Not Dot's small car. She knew that one too. This was a different sound. Smooth, composed, more than one vehicle. The quality of machinery belonging to people who did not need to announce themselves. She went to the window. 2 black vehicles, clean and precisely parked, sitting at her gate. Biscuit, in the yard, raised his head and directed both ears toward them. "Please do not," Nadia said, already moving toward the door. She went outside. 3 people had come from the vehicles. 2 remained near the cars, with the professional stillness she now recognized as trained awareness. The 3rd had walked to the gate and stopped. She knew him before she saw his face clearly, from the particular quality of how he occupied space. The same thing she had registered on the road without understanding what she was registering. He was in the same dark, plain clothes. He stood at her gate and waited. He had not opened it. He had not come onto her property. He waited for her to cross the yard to him, which was a choice he had made deliberately. She stopped on her side of the gate. He looked at her. She looked at him. In the Sunday morning clarity, without chaos around them and without a camera between them, she could see his face properly. The composure she had noticed on the road was identical, not managed composure, the kind you maintained by effort, but the more fundamental kind, the composure of a person who had been dealing with consequential things long enough that steady was his natural state. His eyes were as dark and as present as she remembered. Older than he was, and very still, in a way that meant something different from stillness that was merely calm. The woman with the folder, she would learn her name was Lena, stood precisely behind his right shoulder, already positioned, already holding the relevant documentation. "Miss Osei," he said. He had found her name. That was sensible. "Mr. Vale," she said. Then, "I'm not certain of the right form of address. Is it King, or—" "Cyrus is sufficient," he said. "All right," she said. They regarded each other for a moment. "I assume this is about the photograph," she said. "Yes," he said. "I want to be clear that I did not take it, or share it, or arrange any part of what happened yesterday. My donkey blocked the road. I stumbled. You caught me. Someone had a camera. None of it was deliberate on my side." Lena made a note. Cyrus did not change his expression. "I know that," he said. "I did not come about fault." "Then why did you come?" He chose his words in the order that suited him, which she was already beginning to understand was simply how he used language. He did not begin a sentence without knowing its destination. The photograph was circulating across 4 separate PAC territory networks before midnight, he said. The interpretation that has established itself, widely, and in a self-reinforcing way, is that I have been maintaining a personal relationship privately, in this town, without it being publicly known. "Which is not true," Nadia said. "Which is not true," he said. "However, the interpretation is now established in a way that a direct denial would not effectively correct. A denial at this point would be read as either dishonesty or as confirmation of concealment. In either case, it produces more damage than the misunderstanding it was intended to address." She held this. She understood the logic. She had seen it work in smaller situations, the way correcting a rumor could amplify it. "So a denial makes it worse," she said. "In this specific situation, almost certainly yes." "What are you proposing?" He looked at her, and the look was the one she would come to know. The look that meant he was taking the question as a real question, and was preparing a real answer. "The summit runs for 3 more weeks," he said. "I have 12 territorial representatives present, including 2, whose standing position is openly hostile. The interpretation created by the photograph has produced, in the past 18 hours, a significant and unexpected effect. My approval among previously neutral parties has increased. The story of a personal relationship, a private life, a human connection, has shifted how I am perceived in a way that has political value I did not create and did not plan for." "More human," Nadia said. "In practical terms, yes." She folded her arms. It was how she thought. "What exactly are you proposing?" Lena stepped forward and opened the folder, positioning it on the gate post where both of them could read it. A formal arrangement for the duration of the summit, Cyrus said. You would attend official events as my companion. You would be introduced as someone I have known privately for some time. The appearance of the relationship would be maintained for 3 weeks and concluded quietly after the summit closes. Described to anyone who asks as a mutual private decision made for personal reasons. She looked at the neat paragraphs of terms. She looked at him. No, she said. He did not flinch or adjust. The compensation. I said no, she said, holding her voice level. I have no knowledge of pack politics and no experience in formal political settings. I run a farm alone and I sell things at a market on Saturdays. I have been to formal occasions twice in the past 5 years and left both of them early because I found them genuinely unpleasant. And I do not pretend. It is not something I do. I understand this is an unusual request, he said. It is not unusual, she said. It is absurd. Yesterday I was chasing a donkey across a market. Today someone is asking me to pretend to be the companion of an alpha king at a political summit, in front of 12 pack leaders, for 3 weeks. She paused. No, thank you. He named a figure. She did not let it show on her face, because her answer was not for sale, but she held it in her mind with honesty, because she was not irrational, and the figure was not small. She knew her farm's finances with precision. She knew what this market season had produced. She knew what the incident with Gerald's pots had cost, from a fund that had not been large. The amount doesn't change your farm, he said, which you operate alone, on a margin that does not leave room for the kind of incident yesterday's market produced. The emergency fund in your coat pocket, which is a practical measure taken by someone who has had to use it before. He glanced briefly at Lena. I had someone research the relevant context, not you specifically, the situation. I want to be transparent about that, because I am not here to make you feel surveilled. I am here because there is a problem that is not your fault. You are at the center of it, and I am asking for your help. It was the asking that changed something in the conversation. Not the figure, not the research, not the careful folder. The plainness of the word asking, said without decoration. She looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the folder. She looked at the mountains where the summit lodge sat against the skyline. Biscuit walked across the yard, put his nose through the gate bars, and directed one large eye at Cyrus with steady, evaluative attention. Cyrus looked back at him without visible alarm or discomfort. He is not going to simplify this, Nadia said. I had assumed not, Cyrus said. She stood in her yard in the Sunday morning and turned the question over. 3 weeks was a specific, bounded amount of time. She had conditions she would need met. She had a farm and animals that required ongoing care. She had principles about honesty that were not negotiable. She had said no twice and still had the word available if she needed it. I have not said yes, she said. I know, he said. If I were considering this, she said, I would have conditions, my own conditions, not just yours. Those are negotiable, he said. She was still looking at him, still deciding, when Biscuit leaned forward through the gate bars and took a neat, considered bite from the corner of the folder. Lena made a sharp sound and retrieved the folder. Biscuit chewed the corner with the serene satisfaction of an animal who had expressed himself clearly and was content with the communication. All 3 of the people from the vehicles looked at him. He does that, Nadia said. Cyrus looked at the donkey for a moment, then he looked at Nadia, and for the briefest fraction of a second, the most controlled and deliberate fraction, something in the corner of his expression acknowledged that this situation was, objectively and irreducibly, completely ridiculous. Name your conditions, he said. They negotiated at the gate for 1 hour and 23 minutes. It was not a comfortable negotiation. Neither of them was naturally suited to the transactional form of it. What kept it productive was that they were both, fundamentally, people who said the actual thing. She said what she would not accept without softening it. He said what he could not offer without apologizing for it. And they found the middle ground without pretending it was not the middle. Her conditions, stated clearly. She would not lie about who she was. She would appear as his companion, and attend official events, and maintain the public arrangement. But she would not construct a false backstory that required her to become someone she was not. She would not claim knowledge she did not have. She would answer direct questions in ways that were true in their essentials. She would not perform a fiction that went deeper than the surface. She would retain the ability to manage her farm. Fred would help with the animals as he had before during short absences. She would not abandon her animals to the care of someone who was not equipped for them. For 3 weeks, on the basis of an arrangement she had not initiated. Her own private room at the lodge, with a lock she controlled. Not adjacent, entirely hers. And Biscuit was coming. The last condition produced the longest silence of the negotiation, 11 seconds that she counted. "Your donkey," Cyrus said. Fred and Biscuit had an incident last autumn, involving hoof maintenance that significantly damaged their relationship, Nadia said. "I will not elaborate. The outcome is that Biscuit cannot stay with Fred for an extended period. He comes with me, or I stay here." "The lodge has a stable," Cyrus said. "Good," she said. "I would need him to be properly secured. I will apply my best effort to that consistently," she said. "That is the honest maximum I can offer with Biscuit. My best effort." He looked at her with the expression she would come to recognize. Not skepticism, not humor, something between them. The expression of a person watching an event they had not fully anticipated, and deciding in real time how to categorize it. "Acceptable," he said. The compensation was confirmed. The 3-week timeline was set. The arrangement would be dissolved after the summit's closing ceremonies, and described afterward as a mutual private decision, the kind of language that sounded personal enough to be believable, and vague enough to require no follow-up. They shook hands. His grip was brief, firm, and released without any lingering, and she appreciated the absence of performance in it. She had until 2 o'clock to pack. Lena provided a list of what the summit's formal events required in terms of dress. Nadia read it twice, set it down, picked it up a third time, and called Dot. Dot arrived in 9 minutes with a suitcase that appeared to have been waiting for a purpose like this, packed in advance against some future emergency that turned out to be almost exactly this. She helped Nadia identify what she owned that might work, with the focused efficiency of someone doing something genuinely useful and aware of it. "He came himself," Dot said. "He came with an advisor and 2 guards," Nadia said, folding a shirt. "He came personally," Dot said, underlining the word with her tone. "Dot, there are written terms. It is a practical arrangement. That is the entire situation." Dot looked at her with the patient, undefeated expression of a woman who had decided to let events make the argument. Nadia packed what she needed: practical shoes, 3 sets of good clothes that she thought might manage formal events without assistance, the lavender soap she made for herself, that she was not going to surrender for 3 weeks of lodge amenities, regardless of their quality, her herb kit, because she slept better with familiar smells nearby, 2 books, her phone charger, Fred's annotated care instructions for the goats and chickens, which he had already prepared on a folded sheet of paper, which told her he had anticipated this outcome before she had. Biscuit's feed bag and travel rope went into the back of Lena's second vehicle without comment from Lena, which was its own form of professionalism. The lodge was 20 minutes from town on the mountain road. She had passed it on supply runs without looking at it directly. Seeing it properly now, the full stone frontage, the grounds, the trees that had grown into genuine size over genuine decades, she revised her sense of scale upward considerably. It was larger than the road glimpse had suggested, and more solidly itself, a building that had been built to last, and showed both things without effort. Biscuit stepped out of the transport vehicle, looked at the lodge with both ears forward, and made one long, declaratory sound that brought the heads of everyone visible on the grounds around to see what had produced it. "Stable," Nadia said, taking his rope. "Right now, without announcement." The stable was attached to the eastern outbuilding, clean, quiet, and large enough. She settled Biscuit in, examined the door latch with the particular attention of someone who had learned that checking a latch twice was the minimum necessary, confirmed it was the kind he could not operate, and told him to stay. Marin was waiting in the corridor inside. Marin was in her late 60s, white-haired, with the bright and accurate eyes of someone who had been making fast assessments of people for a very long time, and had refined the skill to something close to art. Senior advisor to Cyrus's household, she explained. The person Nadia should bring practical questions to. Scheduling questions. Anything requiring quiet handling. She had a direct, warm quality that was immediately different from Lena's efficient professionalism, and Nadia trusted her within 4 minutes of meeting her. which was faster than she trusted most people, and which she took as reliable information about Marin, rather than in caution on her own part. "Your room is on the second floor," Marin said, walking with her. "Your own bathroom, your own sitting area, your own key. The week's schedule is on the desk. I would read it tonight, because the first official event is tomorrow evening, and preparation helps." "What is he like?" Nadia said. She had not planned to ask. It came out before the part of her that managed questions had caught up. Marin's hands paused for the smallest moment. "Complicated," she said, "in the specific way that people are complicated when they are very good at something difficult. Making decisions is not hard for him. Most things are clear to him once he has the information. What is hard for him are things that don't fit inside a decision. Things without a right answer, only a least wrong one." She was quiet for a moment as they walked. "He is fair," she said. "That sounds like a small thing, but it is not. He has made choices that were correct, and that cost him. And he made them anyway, without looking for the easier version. There are people in his position who would not have." Nadia said nothing. She was listening with both attention and the part of her that stored things for later. "He is also," Marin said, shifting her tone to signal the end of the serious portion, "extremely poor at small talk. In any social situation where he is uncertain, he defaults to standing very straight and looking at a fixed point in the middle distance. It reads as intimidating. It is actually him being cautious." "That is useful to know," Nadia said. "I thought it might be," Marin said. The room was exactly what had been agreed. Private, quiet, a lock she controlled. She set her bag down, looked out the window at the grounds and the stable and the mountain line beyond, and made 2 lists in her head simultaneously. Things she needed to think through carefully, and things she needed to stop thinking about. The second list was longer. Marin returned at 4 to bring her to a brief meeting. A small sitting room on the ground floor, not his office, not her room. Neutral. Chosen for what it was not. He was already there. Standing near the window in the way she would come to understand was simply how he waited. Upright, not sitting. Because sitting was a comfort he chose deliberately, rather than by default. "Sit, please," he said. "I'm fine standing," she said. He looked at her. Then he remained standing, which she had not expected. Marin left and closed the door. "We should establish what people will be told," he said. "You said acquaintances who became something more, privately. That was in the folder. I want to know if you are comfortable with it," he said. The folder had terms. This is a conversation. They are not the same thing. She held this for a moment. It was a specific and relatively uncommon kind of person who understood that distinction, who knew that agreement in writing was not the same as actual willingness, and who thought to confirm. She added this to what she was accumulating. "I'm comfortable with it," she said. "Less comfortable with the part where we have to behave as if we actually know each other." "That concerns me equally," he said, with a frankness that was immediately easy to sit with. "We should probably," she started. "Practice," he said, at exactly the same moment. They looked at each other. "Briefly," she said. "Briefly," he agreed. What followed was one of the more genuinely uncomfortable 15 minutes of her recent adult life. They were both, as it became immediately clear, people who maintained a natural distance from others, and did not close it without specific reason. She was not demonstrative. He was not demonstrative. They were attempting, without any particular aptitude for the performance, to appear comfortable with each other. He offered his hand for her to take, as a couple entering a room might. She took it. His hand was warm. The grip was careful in the way of someone handling something fragile. "You are holding it like it is evidence at a scene," she said. He looked at their hands. He adjusted. It was considerably better. They walked the length of the room and back. He adjusted his pace to match hers, without drawing attention to the adjustment, which she noted. "You need to be able to look at me," she said. "Right now you are looking at a fixed point approximately at my left ear, which is what people do when they are being polite to someone they don't know yet. Anyone watching us will see it." He moved his gaze to her face. He did it directly, which was easier to work with than indirect would have been. "Better," she said. "You are observant," he said. "I have sold things at a market for 4 years," she said. "You learn to tell who is looking at the product and who is looking at the price. The difference is visible if you know where to look." Something shifted at the corner of his expression. Not a smile. Something smaller and more controlled. A compression that acknowledged what she had said without inflating its response. She noted that he did not laugh at things socially, out of obligation to the conversation. She found this a relief of the specific kind that came from not having to manage someone else's performance. Midway through the practice, she called him the wrong name. The name of a character, from something she had been watching the previous night, which emerged from an inattentive corner of her brain, while the rest of it was focused on her posture and the walk. "I said the wrong name," she said. "I heard," he said. "In public, that would be a significant problem," he said. "Yes." She pressed 2 fingers briefly to her temple. "Cyrus," she said, testing it. "Like Cyrus the Great, ancient Persian king. I will use that." "You can also use you when you are uncertain," he said. "It covers more situations than you would think." "That is less strange than it sounds," she said, and he made the small expression again, and she filed it as his version of laughing, and stored it alongside everything else she was collecting. They ended the practice when it had served its purpose, which was before it became more uncomfortable than useful. At the door, she stopped. "If something goes wrong," she said, "I need you to tell me directly. Not manage it behind the scenes and tell me afterward. Actually tell me. At the time. Because I would rather know something uncomfortable early than discover later that I missed something I should have known about." He looked at her steadily. "Agreed," he said. "I ask the same." She nodded, went to her room, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the mountains through the window. She thought about what she had agreed to and whether she had made a mistake. She thought about 3 weeks as a bounded, finite, manageable interval of time. She thought about harder things she had done successfully. Then she unpacked the lavender soap, put it on the bathroom shelf, and went to check on Biscuit. He was in his stall looking out the window at the grounds with the private, focused expression of an animal, taking thorough stock of new territory. She checked the latch twice, and went to bed, and slept better than she expected. The formal dinner was at 7 the following evening. At 6, Marin arrived with a dress. It was deep green, and well made, without being elaborate. The kind of garment that asked nothing of the person wearing it, except to stand up straight and let it do its work. Nadia put it on, looked in the mirror, and decided it worked. She had a narrow definition of works, and the dress cleared it. Marin arranged her hair without asking for instructions, which was the correct approach. She looked at Nadia's face and posture, and produced something that was still practical, still Nadia's, but elevated into the category of intentional, rather than quick. Nadia watched in the mirror, and appreciated the efficiency of it. No consultation, no alternatives presented, just assessment and execution. 40 years of doing this? Nadia said. 42, Marin said, with the matter-of-fact precision of someone who counted things that mattered. You learn to read what a person needs quickly, or you find another profession. At 10 minutes to 7, Nadia met Cyrus in the corridor outside the main hall. He was in formal clothes, structured jacket, precise fit, the clothes of someone who wore them regularly, and maintained them with the same attention he applied to everything else. He looked, if it was possible, more composed than he had that morning. He looked at her when she came around the corner, and she saw the brief registration, a fraction of a second, where he took in the green dress, and the arranged hair, and updated something, and then it was gone, and he was composed again. He did not comment on it. She appreciated this. He offered his arm, she took it. They walked through the door. The main hall was large and well lit, with tall windows along one wall throwing the last of the evening light across the formal arrangement of tables. There were perhaps 40 people in the room, representatives, companions, advisors, senior summit staff, and the room's sound adjusted when they came in, with the characteristic shift of a gathering that has registered something worth registering. Attention moved and settled. She kept her pace even. She did not look around for reactions. She looked forward, matched Cyrus's posture without mimicking it, and let her hand rest on his arm, with the ease she had not quite had during practice, but was producing now, and would improve with use. He guided her to their places with small, clear navigational signals, a slight adjustment of direction, a hand that indicated rather than directed. She followed without difficulty, which she had expected, because following clear signals was simple when the signals were actually clear. The man to her left introduced himself as the Westcroft representative, older, with genuine rather than performed formal courtesy, the kind that came from having done this long enough that it was simply how he spoke. They talked about the mountain territories. She knew the region from 4 years of farming at its edge, and she talked about the land rather than its politics, which he found unexpected enough to recalibrate his first assessment of her within 3 minutes of conversation. The 6th day was the first day she genuinely forgot, for a stretch of about 2 hours, that she was in an arrangement. Not forgot in the sense of being careless about it. She remained aware of it in the background the way you remained aware of anything structural, but forgot in the sense that she was simply present in the day, talking to people she had come to know, and doing things that felt natural, without any of it requiring management. This happened in the afternoon, during the informal hour between the session and the evening meal, when she found herself in the small library on the lodge's ground floor, talking to the Westcroft representative about the medicinal uses of mountain herbs. He was a retired physician as well as a political representative, a combination she had not expected, and he had opinions about specific plants that were detailed and well-founded, and occasionally contradicted everything she had read. They argued pleasantly for 40 minutes about the properties of 2 specific varieties, and agreed, at the end of it, that the empirical evidence supported her position, and the traditional one supported his, and that both of them were probably partially right. Cyrus found her there. He had been looking for her for the afternoon briefing that Marin had scheduled, and had not found her in her room. He stood in the library doorway looking at the two of them, with an expression that she would only later be able to describe. Something between recognition and something she did not have a word for yet. The expression of a person seeing a thing they had not seen before, and finding that it had changed the shape of something in their thinking. She excused herself from the Westcroft representative, who said he hoped they would continue the argument another time, and went to the door. "Sorry," she said, "I lost track of the time." "Don't apologize," Cyrus said. He looked at her. "What were you talking about?" "Herbs," she said. "He has very specific opinions about mountain herbs." "As a physician?" "As a physician, and as someone who grew up at altitude and has used them all his life," she said. "The combination produces interesting views." He walked beside her down the corridor. "You are building relationships here that have nothing to do with the arrangement," he said. "Is that a problem?" she said. "No," he said. "The opposite." He paused. "The Westcroft representative mentioned you at the session this morning." "Not by name," he said, and I am quoting directly, that he had heard a perspective recently that reminded him why the specific knowledge of people who live close to the land matters more than it is usually given credit for in rooms like this one. She looked at him. "He did not say it was you," Cyrus said, "but Marin was watching his face when he said it, and she told me it was you." Nadia looked at the corridor ahead. "I was just arguing about plants," she said. "Yes," Cyrus said. "That is exactly what he meant." She noticed the recalibration and filed it. To Cyrus's right, the companion of the Hardale representative introduced herself as Clara. Warm, quick, with the specific energy of someone who had been doing this for long enough to be genuinely curious about the parts that were still surprising. "Everyone has been curious about what you would be like," Clara said, without any particular apology for the directness. "Have they?" Nadia said. "The photograph moved very fast and very far. My representative showed it to me first thing yesterday morning. I told him I would ask directly rather than try to find out indirectly, because indirect methods are slower and the answer is usually simpler than the approach." "That is my preference as well," Nadia said. "Then directly. Was any part of it planned?" "My donkey walked into the road," Nadia said. "I stumbled. He caught me. There was a camera. None of it was arranged." Clara was quiet for one moment. Then she laughed. Brief, real, the laugh of a person who has been told something genuinely funny, in a context where they had not expected it. "The photograph does not look like an accident," she said. "Photographs rarely look like what they actually were," Nadia said. Clara considered this with the expression of a person deciding whether to respond to it immediately or file it for later. She filed it and moved the conversation forward to other things, and Nadia followed easily. Across the table, she tracked Cyrus in the way she was already developing, not with direct focus but with the peripheral awareness she gave to things she was monitoring without watching. He spoke at length with the Westcroft representative. Spoke briefly with someone on his other side whose territory she did not know yet. Did not look at her during these exchanges except once, briefly, while she was talking to Clara, a glance that she read as orienting rather than checking, making sure of her position in the room with the attention of someone who has taken on a responsibility. She built her map of the room. She watched who looked to whom for signals before forming visible opinions. She watched which advisors were running things and which were decorative. She identified the Lakemere representative, a quiet woman named Helen sitting 3 places from the center, who had not spoken during the entire first hour, and who, Nadia noticed, watched Cyrus with the specific attention of someone conducting a sustained assessment rather than simply listening. She also noticed, midway through the second course, the man 3 places down on the far side of the table, lean, 40-ish, who occupied his chair with the precise arrangement of someone always aware of how they were sitting and what it communicated. He spoke rarely and strategically. He had been scanning the room since Nadia arrived with the systematic focus of someone building an inventory of what they were looking at. He looked at Nadia twice in the first hour, not with hostility, with evaluation, careful and professional. She met his eyes both times and gave him nothing to work with. After the second time, he said something quietly to the man beside him. The man beside him nodded. She noted this as a beginning and turned back to Clara. After dinner, in the standing portion of the evening, he came to her. Not to Cyrus, to her. "Miss Osei," he said. His voice was smooth and precisely modulated, like a surface that had been prepared specifically for this kind of use. "Lord Dreven," she said. Marin had briefed her extensively on the key names. "I have been curious," he said. "What brings a woman of your background into a setting like this one?" The phrasing was surgical, not overtly rude, shaped to fit through courtesy without triggering it, to deliver its content without being identifiable as an attack if challenged. "The same thing that brings anyone," she said. "Someone I care about asked me to be here." "Of course," he said, with the small, practiced smile that did not involve his eyes. Cyrus has always been so intensely private. We all assumed it was simply a preference he had developed. "People often confuse privacy with the absence of a life," she said. "He has always had a personal life. He simply chose not to share it with people who had no reason to know about it." He looked at her with the slight adjustment of someone whose calculation has produced an unexpected result. He had not expected that answer. She watched him recalibrate. "You are clearly not from the pack world," he said. "No," she said. "I'm a farmer. I grow herbs and keep goats, and sell things at a Saturday market. I have a donkey who started this entire situation, and I suspect everyone in this room has heard about him by now." He blinked, once, briefly, and then the smooth composure was back. She smiled at him with the pleasantness she could produce on demand when required, and excused herself to go to Clara, who was standing near the far window. "What did you say to him?" Clara asked quietly when she arrived. "He has been standing by that wall for 2 minutes with the expression of someone whose calculation has come out wrong." "I answered his questions," Nadia said. "People do not usually answer Dreven's questions that simply," Clara said. "I answer questions the way they come," Nadia said. "It keeps things cleaner." Later, after the guests dispersed and the hall was being cleared, Cyrus came to where she was standing near the tall east window, the one that looked out onto the garden. "Dreven spoke to you," he said. He did. She told him everything that had been said, accurately, without adding interpretation. He listened completely, without interrupting. "He was testing you," he said when she finished. "I know. He will not stop because one test didn't work. He is patient." "He is," Cyrus said. "I want to understand the full landscape before he tests again," she said. "The history between you, the weight of each person in that room, the 3 things this summit is actually trying to decide. I went in tonight without enough context, and it was manageable, but I would rather not repeat it." He looked at her with the attentive, assessing quality she was learning to recognize. "Tonight," he said. "After this clears, I will tell you everything relevant." "Good," she said. They walked back down the corridor side by side, not close, not in the careful away distance of that morning, somewhere between, in a space that had established itself without either of them naming it, and the silence in it was not uncomfortable, which was itself a thing she registered and filed. In the small neutral sitting room, he told her everything. The history with Dreven. 4 years of a formally resolved dispute that had not actually resolved the underlying thing. The specific weight and position of each of the 12 representatives. The 3 decisions the summit needed to produce to close successfully. The particular situation of Helen from Lakemere, small territory, positioned between 2 larger ones, her vote genuinely consequential and she was aware of it. He was organized and clear, and she asked questions where she needed to, and he answered them without deflecting or simplifying. When it was done, she said, "Thank you. This is exactly what I needed." "Does knowing it change anything for you?" He meant, "Does it make you want to leave?" "No. It means I can be useful, rather than just present." He nodded. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He waited. Dreven's argument today, were any of his points valid? A pause. 2 of the 3, he said. Then why were you arguing against all 3? The moment stretched just long enough for her to understand the question had gone somewhere real. Because conceding 2 makes the 3rd his leverage, he said. Or, she said carefully, conceding the 2 valid ones clearly, and in front of everyone, makes the 3rd one look exactly like what it is, politics rather than principle, and Helen from Lakemere sees that. He looked at her. She said nothing more. She had put the thing down, and she waited to see what he did with it. He held it with the specific quality of his thinking, present, not processing away from the room, turning it deliberately and without hurry. "That is a significant shift in approach," he said. "I know. I might be missing something I don't have context for. But you asked me to be honest." "I did," he said. "So I was," she said. He looked at the table for a moment, then at her. "I will think about it," he said. And from the way he said it, she understood, it was not dismissal. It was the thing he actually intended to do. She said goodnight, went to check on Biscuit, who was standing in his stall, in the serene composure of an animal that had no opinions on pack politics, and considered this a personal strength. She stood in the stable doorway in the cool night air, and thought about the conversation. Not the political part, but the quality of being able to say an honest thing directly, and have it received without defensiveness. She had not had many of those conversations recently. She had missed them in a way she had not clearly registered until just now. She went to bed thinking about the morning, and about what came next, and about what it meant that she had been here, in this specific building, doing this specific thing, because a donkey had walked into a road. She thought about how most of the significant things in her life had not started as significant things. The farm had started as a listing she had almost not clicked on. Biscuit had started as a hand raised at an auction for reasons she had not fully understood at the time. The conversation that had eventually gotten her out of the city had started as a comment made over lunch about nothing in particular. She thought, the significant things almost never announce themselves. They arrive looking like ordinary things and you find out what they were only later, looking backward, when you can see the shape of where they led. She did not know yet where this was leading. She had a sense of the direction. She was choosing, tonight, not to turn the direction into a destination before it was ready to be one. She thought about the morning, and about what came next, and about the particular strange fact of being here, in this building, in this situation, because a donkey had made a decision about a road. She found, to her own surprise, that she was not unhappy about it. She went to the window bench that evening, and sat with her knees pulled up, and looked at the mountain line, and thought about what she had been doing here. Not the political surface of it, that she understood clearly. The other layer. The one that had been building underneath the surface of events for 2 weeks, and that she had been paying attention to without quite acknowledging that she was. She had been, she understood now, paying very close attention to a specific person. Not strategically, not because there was a reason to, but because he was worth paying attention to. Because he said things that turned out to mean exactly what they seemed to mean, which was rarer than it should have been. Because he listened in the way that good listeners listened, not waiting for their turn, not deciding what you meant before you finished, but actually taking in what was being said, and then holding it, and then responding to what was actually there. She had not had many conversations with people who listened that way. She had not noticed she was missing it until it was present. She sat in the window for a long time. The mountain light shifted toward evening. The lodge quieted around her. She did not try to resolve the question she was sitting with, because the question was not ready to be resolved. It was still in the process of becoming clear. She just sat with it and let it be what it was. Then she went to check on Biscuit, which was how she ended most evenings, and which was the most reliable method she had for returning to herself after the day had taken her somewhere complex. The second day of the summit began with a morning session Nadia was not required to attend, which gave her 3 hours she had not anticipated. She used the first to call Fred, who confirmed the goats were fine, the chickens were indifferent, and that Biscuit's absence had returned his own farm to a level of peace he had nearly forgotten was the default state. She used the second hour to walk the grounds, which were extensive and largely empty in the morning, before the day's formal activities began. She thought about Drevin as she walked the eastern path that wound through a belt of trees and opened onto a slope facing the mountains. She had been thinking about him since last night, not anxiously, but with the practical attention she gave problems she was actively working to understand. He was not impulsive. He had watched all evening before he approached her, and he had approached her rather than Cyrus first, which told her something about how he saw the arrangement's weak points. He had tested her, and she had not given him what he was looking for, which meant he would adjust. He would look for a different angle. She needed to be ready for what the different angle looked like. She was thinking about this when she found Cyrus on the path. He was walking alone, which surprised her. She had assumed, given the guards present yesterday, that solitary walks were not available to him. She located Owen and one other guard, at a careful distance behind him, and understood, not alone, but permitted the appearance of it. He looked up when he heard her footsteps on the gravel. He slowed. She slowed. They fell into step beside each other, with the natural parallel momentum of two people who were heading in the same direction, and had found it easier to walk together than apart. "Morning session over?" she said. "Adjourned early," he said. The Westcroft representative had a scheduling conflict. "We resume at 2. Was it productive before the adjournment?" "Marginally," he said, without frustration. "Just honest assessment." They walked in silence for a moment. The path opened onto the slope, and she stopped to look at the mountains, which she could see from her farm on clear days. The same range, the same peaks, from a different angle and elevation. He stopped beside her. "I have been thinking about Drevin," she said. "So have I," he said. "He will move in public," she said. "He watched all of last night's gathering before he approached me. He was assembling information, not acting. When he acts, it will be somewhere with maximum witnesses." She looked at the mountains. When that happens, the answer is not argument. Argument gives him a platform. The answer is being more real than whatever version of me he tries to construct. He was quiet for a moment. "You did that last night without trying to," he said. "I was not trying to do anything, except answer his questions," she said. "That is usually enough, if you are actually yourself when you do it." He looked at the mountain line. "You asked me yesterday what I tried, before I understood what I was better at," he said. She had not expected him to return to it. "Yes," she said. "I tried being large," he said, "when I first took leadership. There is a version of this position that fills space, very visible, very present, very loud, in the way that weight is loud. I tried it for about 8 months. And it was exhausting, and the decisions I made from inside it were worse," he said. "I was responding to how the position felt, rather than to what the work actually required." He looked at his hands briefly. "I do better when I am smaller, more precise." She looked at him. It was not a small thing to say that out loud. She did not point this out, because pointing to the value of what someone had offered tended to make them feel they should not have offered it. "That is an accurate read of yourself," she said simply. He looked at her with the specific attention he gave things he was taking seriously. They turned back along the path. The guards maintained their distance. The morning was cold and bright with the high-altitude clarity that made the mountain line look close enough to reach. "Did you always want a farm?" he said. He asked it without preamble, in the way of a person asking something they were actually curious about. "No," she said. "I spent 6 years in a logistics office. I was good at it in the technical sense, but not suited for it in the deeper sense. I needed to be able to see what I was making. The farm gives you that," he said. "Every day," she said. "Either you grew something or you didn't. Either the animals are healthy or they need attention. The feedback is immediate and real, and you can hold the results." He was quiet for a moment. "I understand that preference," he said. She wanted to ask what that looked like for him, what outcomes he could hold in a life made of decisions that played out at scale and over years. But it was only the second day, and they were something between colleagues and not quite colleagues, and she did not have the standing for that question yet. She kept it for later. The afternoon session she attended as a companion observer. She sat at Cyrus's left and watched the room build its picture. 12 representatives around a large table, advisors along the walls, the specific architecture of power that arranged itself in rooms like this one. Dreven led one faction with the deliberate precision of someone who had been preparing the argument for a long time and was delivering it exactly as planned. Cyrus listened and asked specific questions, and when he countered, he was brief. Never more words than the point required. She watched Helen from Lakemere through the entire session. Helen looked at the table in front of her during Dreven's arguments. When Cyrus spoke, she looked at him. This was consistent and specific, and told Nadia exactly what she had already suspected. Helen was not listening to the arguments so much as watching how the people making them behaved. After the session, she told Cyrus what she had seen, accurately and in sequence. He listened to all of it without interruption. Helen needs to feel safe deciding, she said, not persuaded, not pressured. Safe. She is watching you handle Dreven to understand what kind of person wins before she decides who she wants to win. He was quiet for a moment, with the quality of his thinking visible in the stillness. I will request a private meeting with her, he said, outside the formal structure. Not to argue, Nadia said, just to talk. Yes, he said, I understand. She believed that he did. She went to dinner and talked to Clara, and watched Dreven, watching the room, from 3 places down the table, and she thought, he has not made his move yet. He is still assembling. She went to bed thinking about the patterns she was building, and the one she did not have a word for yet, the one that had to do with the Eastern Path, and the quality of walking next to someone who said things because he meant them. That, she thought, she would figure out later. The thing about the second week, she reflected later, was that it changed the quality of what she was doing, without changing what she was doing. The surface was identical. Formal events, companion role, public appearances, the maintenance of the arrangement's visible architecture. But underneath the surface, something had shifted its center of gravity. She stopped thinking about it as performing, not because she had decided to stop thinking about it that way, but because the words stopped fitting accurately. She was not performing anything. She was simply present, which was different, simpler, and more demanding simultaneously, because there was nothing to hide behind. She talked to people she found interesting. She asked questions she actually wanted answered. She paid attention to the things in the room that were real, and did not perform attention to the things that were not. And at the end of each day, she sat in the sitting room with Cyrus, and told him what she had seen and heard, and he did the same for her, and the exchange was the part of the day she valued most. She also noticed, in herself, something she had not been tracking consciously, but which became visible to her on the morning of the 9th day. She was no longer translating. In the first days at the summit, she had been running a constant internal translation, taking what she saw and heard, and running it through a filter, to understand it in terms she knew. By the 9th day, she was no longer translating. She had learned enough of the room's language that she understood it directly, the way you understood a language when you had been living inside it long enough. She thought about this while walking the Eastern Path on the 9th morning, alone, in the early hour before the day's sessions. She thought, the thing I came here to do, and the thing I am actually doing, have diverged considerably. And then she thought, that is fine. The thing I am actually doing is better. The birds in the mountain trees were the same birds she heard from her farm window. She found this comforting, in the specific way that continuity was comforting when everything else had changed. Later came faster than she expected. The summit's second week opened with the most significant social event of the gathering, the large formal reception where all parties would be visible to each other simultaneously, and where the first real positioning of the summit would occur, in the way that social positioning always occurred, obliquely, in tone and proximity, and who spoke to whom, and who did not. Nadia had spent the first week building her map. She knew who was genuinely persuaded by argument and who performed persuasion while waiting to see which way the room moved. She knew the advisors who ran things and the ones who were present for other reasons. She had a working picture of every significant person at the summit and had been updating it every evening. She also knew, by the morning of the reception, that Dreven's move was close. The signs were behavioral and clear if you were watching for them. The tightening of his circle in the past 2 days, Callum appearing at the edges of more conversations than before, and Drevin himself growing quieter and more settled in the specific way of a person who has prepared something fully and is now simply choosing the moment. She told Cyrus on the morning walk they had by this point established without naming it as a habit. "I have no specific information," she said. "I want you to be aware that something is coming soon." "I have the same reading," he said. They walked in step along the eastern path, the guards at their distance behind. "He has been making inquiries about you through his people, who you are, how long I have known you privately, whether you have any prior connection to Pack Society. And the answers? Consistent with what we have said, no one here has cause to doubt." He paused. "The risk is not from people who know you. It is from people who have reason to want doubt to exist. He cannot create proof of something that does not exist," she said, "but he does not need proof. He only needs the word suspicious to live in the room." "Yes," Cyrus said. "Then let him say it in the open," she said. "Wherever he is planning to move, let him move there, in front of everyone, where everyone can see what he is doing. An accusation made in private grows. One made in public, in front of people who can see it for what it is, can be answered in kind." He looked at her sideways. "You cannot perform not caring about his opinion," she said. "But you actually do not care about his opinion. That will show if you let it. The room will see the difference." He was quiet for a moment. "You think they will?" "Some of them," she said, "the ones who matter." The reception was long. Nadia wore the dark blue dress Marin had selected, which suited her for the same reasons the green one had. It asked nothing extra. She ate the first 2 courses and talked to the people near her and was present in all the ways the room required, while maintaining the secondary awareness she had developed for what was happening at the edges of the gathering. Drevin made his move between courses when the formal structure relaxed. He was speaking to the Westcroft representative in the carrying, measured tone of someone who had arranged to be overheard. "It is interesting," Drevin said, with the pleasant composure of someone making an observation rather than a statement, "how much we are expected to accept on the word of a man who has never before brought a personal life to a professional setting." He did not look in Nadia's direction. The studied indirectness was its own form of accusation. 12 pack leaders at this table, and not one of them encountered this woman before last week. If such a relationship had existed privately for any meaningful length of time, there would be some trace of it. Someone who had heard her name, someone who recognized her family. The table near him had grown slightly quieter, in the way that tables did when something worth listening to was being said nearby. "It is simply unusual," Drevin said pleasantly, "to appear so fully formed at so specific a moment." Nadia set down her water glass. She turned in her seat with the same even tone she used at the market when someone questioned the price of something that was priced fairly. "Lord Drevin," she said. He looked at her. "You are correct that no one here had heard my name before last week," she said. "That is because I am not from the pack world. I'm a farmer. I grow herbs and keep goats and sell things at a Saturday market in a small mountain town. The people who know me well are my neighbors, and a potter named Gerald who actively dislikes me, and the farmers I see at the market." She held his gaze without difficulty. "My life has been private because I am a private person, not because it has anything to hide. Most ordinary lives look thin from the outside because ordinary people do not perform them for an audience." The table was very quiet. Drevin looked at her with the eyes of someone running rapid reassessment. "The question you are actually asking," she said, "is whether I am real. I am real. I am simply not useful to you in the way you need me to be." She picked up her water glass and looked at him steadily. "Is there anything else?" "No," he said, with the smooth composure of a man who had lost a particular engagement and was filing the information for later. "Thank you for the clarification." She turned back to the table. Clara, 2 seats away, was looking at her with the expression of someone who has just seen something unexpected and is revising a previous assessment upward. The conversation resumed. Later, when the hall was clearing, Cyrus came to the east window, where she had gone for a moment of quiet. He stood in the space that was no longer the careful away distance of the first week, but was not yet something else. "Drevin will regroup," he said. "I know. What you did tonight." He stopped. He was assembling it. She waited. "You did not try to win," he said. "You removed the place his argument was trying to go. He was trying to make people feel uncertain," she said. The answer to uncertainty is not more argument. It is being more real than his version of you. You do that, he said, without apparent effort. I have spent a long time being exactly who I am, she said. It is not a skill I worked at. It is what is left after you try other versions and find out they do not fit. He was quiet. He was looking at the dark garden through the window. She looked at the same thing. You asked me what I tried before I knew what I was better at, he said. You answered already, she said. Not completely, he said. He sat in the chair near the window, not across the room, not beside her, but in the position the room offered for a private conversation. I tried being large, he said. Very present, very imposing. I did it for 8 months, before I understood it was making the decisions worse. I was responding to how the position felt, rather than to what the position actually required. He paused. I am better when I am smaller, more precise. But it took me a while to give myself permission to be that. She looked at him. It was not a small thing to say that out loud, to someone he had known for 8 days. She did not point this out. That sounds like the right read of yourself, she said. He looked at her, and something in him shifted, subtle, quiet, the slight lowering of whatever was permanently held in place. They sat in the room with the dark window, and the sound of the lodge settling into its night, and the quiet between them had a different quality than the silences of the first days. Not the absence of a common register, the presence of one they had found. She went to bed later than usual. Outside her window, the mountain was very dark, the kind of dark that had depth to it, layered. She lay on her back, looking at the ceiling, and thinking about the conversation, and the way it had moved, and about the word that was starting to form in the back of her mind, for what was building between them, and how she was not ready yet to say it, and how that was probably fine, because neither was he. On the 10th day, Biscuit escaped from the stable. Nadia was in a small informal meeting she had not expected to join. 3 moderate representatives and Cyrus, working through a specific piece of boundary language outside the formal session. She was there because separation had become more conspicuous than presence, and because she had twice in smaller settings asked the question the room had been working around. She was making a point about the Lakemere concern, when Owen appeared in the doorway, with the expression of a man who needed to speak with her, and was very aware that the timing was not ideal. She excused herself. Your animal is in the main courtyard, Owen said. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. The latch, she said. The latch I checked on arrival. Is that the original latch that was on the stable door before we moved in, or was it the one I checked? Owen's silence was complete and sufficient. She walked quickly. Out through the main corridor and the side door into the courtyard, where Biscuit stood in the center of the ornamental rose garden with his nose 6 centimeters from the nearest bush, and 3 members of the lodge's staff were arranged around him, at the cautious distance of people who have agreed, without discussion, that the next move belonged to someone else. Everyone step back, please, Nadia said. They stepped back with immediate and visible relief. She walked to Biscuit. He turned his head and looked at her, with the satisfaction of an animal who had successfully arranged the situation he preferred. You are not eating those roses, she told him. He exhaled slowly. She took his trailing rope and stood with him in the courtyard, and breathed the cool morning air, and looked at the roses and the lodge windows, and thought about the meeting she had been in the middle of. I was being useful in there, she said. He shook his head gently. It was going well, she said. She heard footsteps on the gravel behind her. She knew them before she turned. She had been learning his footsteps for 10 days without deciding to. Cyrus came to the edge of the courtyard. He looked at Biscuit. He looked at the rose beds. He looked at the retreating staff. He came into the courtyard and stopped a few feet away from Biscuit. Owen told me, he said. Did he tell you about the latch situation? She said. He did. It has been corrected. He looked at Biscuit for a moment, with the direct, assessing attention he gave most things. Biscuit looked back with both ears forward. I had understood that animals responded to authority, he said, with the dryness he reserved for observations about himself. Biscuit responds to very few things, Nadia said. Authority is not among them. He came to stand beside her, and they both looked at the rose beds. He followed you, Cyrus said, from the stable. He was in his stable when I went indoors this morning, she said. From the stable to the building, Cyrus said. Owen has been observing this. His words were that Biscuit has been showing, and I am using his exact phrasing, strategic restlessness, since you began spending more time in closed sessions. Nadia looked at her donkey. He came to find you, Cyrus said. She was quiet for a moment, a longer moment than she had expected. He is a donkey, she said. Yes, Cyrus said. He does not have enough. She stopped. He does not do things like that. He does appear to have done exactly that, Cyrus said. She looked at Biscuit. He looked back at her, with both eyes level and both ears tilted in her direction, and the expression he wore when he was present, in a specific way, that she had never successfully described to anyone. He was not demonstrative. He never had been. He did not follow her around the farm or seek her out in the mornings the way animals did in stories. He existed alongside her with a particular, consistent, undemonstrative presence, and she had built her understanding of him around that fact. Except that he had figured out the latch, and come to find her. She was not going to be sentimental about this. But she stood in the courtyard with his rope in her hand, and she thought, without decoration, "You came to find me." He is a specific creature, she said. Yes, Cyrus said. Consistently specific, she said. Yes, he agreed. Biscuit shifted his weight and leaned his shoulder, very slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward her, without looking at her. Can I ask you something? Cyrus said. It was the first time he had asked to ask, rather than simply asking. The preamble meant the question was in territory he was not certain about. Yes, she said. Why the farm? He said. Not the version you gave me before. The actual reason. She looked at the tree line beyond the courtyard wall. She thought about how to be honest about it. I had a version of a life that worked on paper, she said. All the right decisions made correctly and in order. And I was living it correctly, and one day, I understood that I had been working toward a future version of myself that I had never actually met. I had been planning for someone I had imagined, but never verified. She paused. The farm was the first thing I chose without a plan. I just chose it, and then I arrived, and dealt with what it was. And what it was, he said, with a glance at Biscuit. Partly, she said. And goats. And 4 years of Saturday mornings that felt, for the first time in a long time, like they were actually mine. Is it what you wanted? He said. Now that you know what it is. She thought about this honestly. It is the most myself I have ever been, she said. Whether that is what I wanted before I knew to want it, I cannot say, but it is what I would choose again. He was quiet. You? She said. She had started asking him back 3 days ago, without deciding to. He answered, which had surprised her until it stopped surprising her. I would choose this work, he said. I would not have chosen the way it arrived, but the work itself. I believe it is necessary, and I am suited for it. Those two things coinciding in the same life is not something I take for granted. No, she said, they don't always coincide. They stayed in the courtyard long after Biscuit had been returned to the newly latched stable, and the rose beds had been confirmed unharmed, and the staff had dispersed to other things. They stayed because the conversation was continuing in the spaces between words, and neither of them was in a hurry to end it. She told him about arriving at the farm for the first time, the smell and the light, and the understanding that had come from standing in an empty yard. He told her about the evening of his first day in leadership, sitting in an office that was not yet his, understanding that everything that happened from that moment was his to decide and his to carry. They talked about the weight of things and what they gave back in exchange for being carried, about choosing with your whole self rather than with only the cautious part. At the end of it, she said, "We should go back inside." Yes, he said. Neither of them moved for a moment. This was, she started. Yes, he said. She looked at him. He looked back with the quality of attention that he had when he was not managing it, simpler than his usual composure, more present, just him looking at her without the distance. She looked away first, not because she needed to, because she needed to think, and looking at him was not helping. Lunch at 1, she said. I know, he said. She walked back inside. She went to the window bench in her room and sat and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to think about what was happening. Then she went to lunch. The feelings that had been building between them over the second week did not announce themselves. They accumulated in small, specific, unmistakable ways. She noticed that he adjusted his pace to hers when they walked, always, without making it visible. She noticed that he had started remembering things she had mentioned in passing, that she preferred plain tea, that high-ceilinged rooms made her cold, that she looked slightly to the left when she was working something out. He used these things quietly. He did not draw attention to the using of them. He simply found her a seat away from the draft and made sure plain tea was available, and never asked what she was thinking when she was looking to the left. She noticed, in turn, that he shifted his pen to his left hand in sessions that were going badly, that he asked important questions exactly once and did not return to them, that the guard he spoke to most easily was Owen, who offered nothing he had not been asked for, and that this told her something about what he found restful. She called Fred on the 8th evening, using the 40 minutes before dinner to sit in the window of her room and hear a voice from home. Fred answered on the second ring, which meant he had been near the phone. "Goats?" she said. "Fine," he said. "All of them. The brown one has been pushing at the gate, but nothing new." "She does that when it's going to rain," Nadia said. "Noted," Fred said. He was quiet for a moment with the particular quality of Fred's quiets, which were not empty. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "It is very different from the farm." "I expect it is," he said. "It is interesting," she said. "I did not expect it to be this interesting." Fred was quiet again. Then he said, "Dot says you are doing something useful there." "Dot has not heard from me since I left," Nadia said. "Dot has sources," Fred said. She laughed. "How are your chickens?" she said. "Fine," he said. "They are always fine. Chickens are indestructible." "I know," she said. "It is one of my favorite things about them." They talked for 20 minutes about the farm and the weather, and a situation with Fred's fence that had been developing for 3 weeks, and had now reached a conclusion. When she hung up, she sat for a moment in the window, with the mountain light going gold in the distance, and the lodge quiet around her, and the specific, warm weight of knowing that the place she came from was still exactly where she had left it, doing exactly what it had always been doing, waiting for her return, without requiring anything of her in the meantime. She thought about what it meant to have a place like that. She thought about what it meant to have people like that. She thought, not everyone has this, and I should not forget that I do. She made a discovery about him on the 8th day, which was that he took notes in a specific way. She had been sitting to his left during the morning session, and had been able to see his notepad at an angle, and she had noticed that he wrote in 2 columns. On the left, what was being said, abbreviated and factual. On the right, a separate column she could not read from her angle, but that was clearly something different, longer, with more density to it. She asked him about it that evening. He looked at her with the slight surprise he showed when something she noticed turned out to be specific and accurate. "The left column is the record," he said. "What was said. The right column is what I think is true underneath what was said. You keep them separate," she said. "They are separate things," he said. She thought about this. "What does the right column say about today?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to a specific page and read it to her. Not performing the reading, just reading it, as if the notepad were a document they were reviewing together. The right column on today's page said 3 things. That the Hardale representative had been speaking for 2 hours about a position he did not actually hold. That Dreven's argument about the eastern boundary was structurally correct, but his conclusion was wrong. And that Helen from Lakemere was not undecided. She was decided, and waiting for the room to catch up to her. "That last one is interesting," Nadia said. "Yes," he said. "Have you considered that she might be waiting for you specifically?" she said. "That she has decided which way she is going to go, and she is waiting to see if you deserve to know it." He held this. "If that is true," he said slowly, "then the approach is to deserve it rather than pursue it." "Yes," she said. "And deserving it looks like being the same person in every room," she said, "whether she is watching or not." He looked at her for a moment. "Are you always this direct?" he said. "Only with things that seem important," she said. "I save my indirectness for very low-stakes situations, where it does not matter either way." He made the small expression. "I cannot decide," he said, "whether that is reassuring or alarming." "Neither," she said. "It is just accurate." She also noticed, with the accumulating observation of someone who was watching steadily, that he changed slightly in different rooms. Not the way people changed who were performing different versions of themselves. That was a different thing, something she recognized and had learned to identify. He changed the way an instrument changed across different frequencies, fundamentally itself, but more or less resonant, depending on the environment. In the formal session, he was precise and economical, and held the authority of the room without appearing to hold it. In the smaller meetings with the moderate representatives, he was more conversational and slightly more willing to ask questions that were genuinely open, rather than leading. On the morning path, he was the version she was most familiar with. Quieter, more willing to say things that were not finished thoughts yet, more present, in the way that mattered more than presence in a room. She thought about what this told her about him. It told her that he was not performing in any of these rooms. He was genuinely responding to what each room required, and bringing exactly what was appropriate. That was not manipulation. That was the specific skill of a person who understood different contexts well enough to meet each one accurately. She had a version of this herself. She was different at the market than she was with Dot. Different with Dot than she was with Fred. Different with Fred than she was in her own kitchen in the early morning. The version of herself that existed in this lodge over the past 2 weeks was newer and stranger, and she was still finding its edges, but it was still herself. She thought, this is what people mean when they say someone is comfortable in their own skin. Not that they are the same in every situation, that they are themselves in every situation, which is a different and more difficult thing. She was learning him the way she learned the farm, not through revelation, but through consistent, attentive daily accumulation. She had developed, by the 4th day, the specific skill of being present in a room without demanding anything from it. She had always had a version of this at the market. You set up your stall, you were there. You let people come and go. You were available without being insistent. At the summit it worked similarly, but at a different scale, and with a different kind of room. People came to her in the margins of events because she was not pursuing anything from them, and the conversations she had in those margins were consistently more honest than the conversations happening at the formal table. Clara brought her tea one afternoon and said, "You have collected more genuine opinions in 5 days than anyone in that room has in a week of formal sessions." "I have not been collecting anything," Nadia said. "No," Clara said. "That is exactly why." There was a logic to this that Nadia recognized from the market. The people most likely to give you their honest opinion about your herbs were the ones you were not visibly trying to sell to. The transaction completed itself when the other person felt no pressure in it. She thought about what it would mean to apply this understanding to the rest of her life. Not the market version of it, which she already lived, but the larger version, the one about being exactly what you were, and trusting that what you were was enough to make the things happen that needed to happen. She had been moving toward this understanding for years, and she thought she was nearly at it. She thought she might be at it now, actually. She thought this summit, improbable as it was, might be the thing that had gotten her there. She did not say any of this to Clara. She said, "More tea?" And Clara said yes, and they sat in the quiet afternoon with their tea, and the mountain light coming through the window. Clara said nothing about any of this directly. She simply smiled into her tea on the mornings they shared it, and Nadia found this mildly irritating and entirely understandable. On the evening of the 15th day, Lena came to her room. "The council is asking whether you would consider extending the arrangement past the original timeline," Lena said. "Approximately 10 additional days to cover a ratification meeting after the summit closes." 10 more days, Nadia said. "Approximately." "I'll think about it," she said. Lena nodded and left with the efficiency of a person who had delivered a message and understood that the recipient required time rather than further information. Nadia sat on the edge of the bed and thought about 10 more days. The farm, Fred, the goats, the market she had now missed twice. She thought about what 10 more days of this specific proximity would do to the things she was still working to keep clear and honest in her own mind. She went out to the balcony. The night was cold and clear, the mountain sky dense with stars at this altitude. She stood at the rail and breathed and looked at the grounds and the trees and the mountain line. She heard a door open below and to her right. The first-floor reading room balcony sat directly below hers, offset slightly to the right, and Cyrus was standing on it. He looked up when he saw her. She looked down. "Couldn't sleep?" she said. "I don't sleep much," he said. "Habit. You?" "Thinking," she said. About the extension, he said. Not a question. Yes, she said. He was quiet. Did you ask for it? She said. No, he said. The council raised it independently. They see strategic value in continuity. And you? She said. The mountain quiet did not push, it held them both. I did not oppose it, he said. She held those 3 words. Did not oppose it. From him, with his economy, she understood what they covered, and what they left deliberately, carefully, uncovered. I haven't decided yet, she said. Take the time you need, he said. Cyrus, she said. He looked up. When the summit ends, she said, I am going back to my farm. That is certain for me. That does not change. I know, he said. I am not saying it to close something, she said. I am saying it so that whatever is happening between, she stopped and began again with more precision, so that what it is what it actually is, not built on top of a version that only works if I become someone else. He was quiet. I hear you, he said. And, she said. And I have not once, in any moment, wanted you to be someone else, he said. Not from the first 5 minutes on that road. He paused. I also go back to my responsibilities when this ends. That is equally certain. What exists between those 2 certainties is something I do not have a ready framework for. I am telling you that honestly. She breathed in the cold air. Neither do I, she said. They stood on their separate balconies in the dark, and the mountain held its distance. The extension, she said finally. Yes, he said. I'll tell Lena tomorrow, she said. He looked up at her one more time. Good night, Nadia, he said. Good night, she said. She went back inside. She sat in the window bench for a long time and thought about 2 people on separate balconies, saying careful and honest and incomplete things, and how the incompleteness was not failure but recognition. They were in the middle of something, and the middle was not the place to resolve it. She had already decided to agree before she went to the balcony. She just needed to know whether he wanted her there for the same reasons the council did, or for different ones. The answer had been careful and honest and incomplete, same as hers. She thought about Fred, briefly, about what Fred would say if she tried to explain any of this to him. Fred would listen to the entirety of it without interrupting, looking at a fence post or a tool or a piece of equipment that needed attention, and at the end of it he would say one precise thing that was more accurate than anything she could have said herself. Fred was the kind of person who refined his thinking so thoroughly before speaking that what came out was always the essential piece. She wondered what the essential piece of this situation was, if you had to say it in one sentence. She tried a few versions in her head. None of them were quite right. The essential piece was something about beginning something you did not plan for, and discovering it was more itself than anything you had planned would have been, and she did not have a sentence for that yet. She thought she was getting closer. She thought, also, that she was going to be very glad to get back to the farm, and simultaneously, not entirely ready for this to be done. Both of those things were true at the same time, which told her something. She told Lena yes in the morning, before she had done anything else, because she had decided in the night, and she did not believe in sitting on decisions that were already made. Lena received this with the efficient warmth of someone who was pleased, and was expressing it in the only register available to her, which was competent forward movement. She said she would inform the council, and update the schedule, and that nothing needed to change in Nadia's day-to-day arrangements at the lodge, for the duration of the extension. Nadia thanked her. Lena left. Nadia went to check on Biscuit, who was eating his morning feed with the focused serenity of an animal that had no concept of extensions or arrangements, or the political utility of personal relationships, and considered this a form of wisdom. She stood in the stable doorway and watched him eat and thought, I would do this extension even if the council had not asked. That is the honest truth of it. I am staying because I want to see how this ends. She was not entirely sure what she meant by this. She was not sure how she wanted it to end. She was sure that she wanted to see. 3 days before the summit closed, Drevin made his final move. Nadia had known it was coming. 5 days of signals had built to a specific readiness in him, the tightening of his circle, Callum becoming invisible in shared spaces, while more active in private ones, and the particular settled calm that Drevin had entered, the loaded calm of a person who has prepared something fully, and is now simply waiting for the right moment to use it. She had told Cyrus. He had his own read of it. What neither of them had was the specific shape of what Dreven had found. The closing dinner was the largest gathering of the summit. All 12 representatives, companions, advisors, observers from smaller territories, the full weight of everyone present assembled in one room for the summit's final significant evening. The size of the gathering was not accidental. An audience had been arranged. She sat beside Cyrus and ate the first 2 courses with the contained awareness she had developed over 3 weeks. Fully present, tracking everything, letting nothing she was tracking show in her face. Midway through the 3rd course, Dreven stood. The act itself broke the evening's structure. There was no protocol in a dinner for addressing the room. Standing was a statement before a word had been said, and the room turned to him the way rooms turn to things that had decided to become events. "I apologize for the informality," he said, with the perfect courtesy of someone who had prepared the apology in advance and was delivering it precisely. "There is a matter I believe this summit should address before we proceed to close, a matter of honesty." Cyrus's expression did not change. Nadia looked at Dreven and kept her face exactly as it was. "It is my understanding," Dreven said, addressing the room rather than any individual, "that the relationship presented to this summit over the past 3 weeks is not what it has been presented to be." He paused with the timing of someone who had rehearsed this. "I have come into possession of documentation suggesting the arrangement was formalized before the summit began, agreed to in writing, with specified compensation and an end date." He looked to Callum. Callum passed him the folder. Nadia looked at the folder and knew it immediately. Lena's legal document from the farm road 3 weeks ago, the corner still missing where Biscuit had taken it, the rest of it readable. "A contract," Dreven said. "I raise this not to embarrass anyone. I raise it because this summit has operated on an assumption of honesty between its parties, and honesty requires this to be addressed." He set the folder open on the table. The room was very quiet. Nadia looked at Cyrus, who was looking at Dreven with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not anger, not defensiveness, but the stillness of a man who is inside a moment that has narrowed to a single decision and is seeing it with complete clarity. She looked at the room. Helen from Lakemere was looking at her table. Clara was looking at Nadia, with eyes that said clearly, "I am ready to follow your lead." The Westcroft representative was looking at the center of the table, as though it contained something worth studying. She looked at Dreven, standing with the patient composure of a man who has placed something at the center of a room and is watching what it does. She stood up. She stood, because it was what you did when you needed people to understand that what you were about to say was being said with your whole self, not from the margins. "Lord Dreven is correct," she said. The room adjusted immediately. That was not what anyone present had been expecting. "The document in that folder is real," she said. "I agreed to it. Cyrus asked me to attend this summit in a specific role. I agreed. There were terms and I signed them. I will not say otherwise, because it is true and I do not deny true things." She paused, not for effect, but because she was choosing the next words with the same deliberateness she had given everything she had said in this room over the past 3 weeks. The room was very quiet, with the specific quiet of people who are paying full attention. "I am also aware," she said, "that some of you here have spent 3 weeks building your own reading of what you observed. I am not going to tell you that reading is wrong. I am going to say that it is incomplete, because the beginning of a thing and what it becomes are different pages, and reading only the first one tells you where something started but does not tell you where it is now." She looked at the folder on Dreven's table. "Lord Dreven has the first page," she said. "I am offering you the current one. You are each capable of deciding which is more relevant to the work you came here to do." She looked at the room. All 12 representatives, the advisors, the observers. "What I will also tell you," she said, "is that the document describes how this arrangement began. It does not describe what it is now." She kept her voice even and addressed the room as a whole, the way she had learned to address a market when something needed saying. "I came here as a practical agreement. I am still here as something I do not have a word for, because the word would require more certainty than I currently have, and I am not going to manufacture certainty for the sake of a clean answer." She looked at Dreven. "The document Lord Dreven has produced tells the truth about the beginning," she said. "What I am telling you right now is the truth about right now. Those are 2 different truths. Both of them are honest. I will let this room decide what to do with each of them. She sat down. The room held its quiet, not shock. She had learned the qualities of Summit silence well enough to distinguish them. This was a room thinking, people looking down or sideways or at nothing specific, assembling something from what they had heard. Drevin looked at her for a long moment. He set his glass down with deliberate care, made a decision about something, sat down. He did not speak again for the remainder of the evening. Cyrus, beside her, was very still. She did not look at him. She breathed and looked at the table and waited. After a moment that lasted longer than its seconds, Helen from Lakemere said, clearly, across the table, "I believe we can continue with the meal." And the room did. Conversation resumed, different in quality from before, quieter in some places, more deliberate in others, but it continued. Nadia ate what was in front of her. She spoke when spoken to, briefly and honestly. She did not add to what she had said, because she had said what was true, and adding to it would have looked like management. Clara reached across quietly and said, "You are remarkable." "I told the truth," Nadia said. "Yes," Clara said. "That is exactly what I meant." After the gathering dissolved, she went to the east window at the far end of the hall and stood in the garden view and let the evening settle through her. She heard his footsteps before she saw him. He came to stand beside her, not at the careful away distance of the first week, but in the space that had been closing for days, the space between careful and something else. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Are you?" "Yes," he said. They looked at the garden. "You didn't have to say the rest of it," he said. "I know," she said. "After confirming the document, you could have stopped." "Stopping there would have been its own dishonesty," she said. "I told you from the beginning that I do not pretend. Leaving out the true part because it was complicated would have been pretending." He was quiet. "Cyrus," she said. "Yes." She turned. He looked at her. The hall was emptying, and the light was low, and the moment had a quality of privacy it had not been designed to have, but that they had found in it anyway. "I meant what I said in there," she said. "I do not have the word. I am not going to manufacture one, but I meant it." He held her gaze with the stillness he had when something was mattering, not the managed composure for rooms, but the deeper quiet underneath it. "I know," he said. "Do you have the word?" she said. "No," he said, "but I have been aware of the thing the word would name, for longer than I have been willing to say." She looked at him. "How long?" she said. "The reception dinner," he said. "When you told Drevin about your farm, and your neighbor, and your donkey, without apology and without any calculation about how it would land." He paused. "I understood something in that moment, about what it looks like to be entirely certain of who you are, not performed certainty, the real kind. I had not been in the presence of it before, not like that." She was very still. "I should have said something sooner," he said. "We are both extremely poor at this kind of conversation," she said. "Yes," he said. "I am aware." The last layer of management between them had been set down somewhere in the past 20 minutes, quietly, without ceremony, and they were both standing on the other side of it. "The summit ends in 3 days," she said. "Yes," he said. "I go back to my farm," she said. "I know," he said. "And then," she said. "And then," he said, and let it sit incomplete. Not because he did not know what came after, but because what came after was not for this room, this evening, with the summit still technically present around them. She also thought, sitting in the garden view window of a lodge 20 minutes from her farm, that she had been given something rare in these 3 weeks, which was the chance to be useful in a context she had not chosen and had not prepared for, and that she had turned out to be suited for in ways she had not known about herself. That was a gift of a specific kind, the kind that arrived uninvited and turned out to be exactly the thing you needed, the kind that came, sometimes, because a donkey blocked a road. She was going to write this down when she got home, because it was the kind of thing that was clear right now and might become harder to see clearly later. The specific lesson of it. The thing about showing up completely as yourself, in a situation you did not ask for, and finding out that completely yourself was exactly what the situation needed. She thought, "I should remember this. I should carry this with me." She thought about what carrying it would look like in the days and weeks and months ahead. She thought it would look like the farm, mostly, because the farm was where she did most of her living, and where the lessons landed and became part of her. She thought it might also look like something else, something new, something that was currently in the process of becoming itself the way all real things were, slowly and with patience, and without rushing the parts that were not ready. She was not going to rush any of it. She had time. She had the farm and the market and Biscuit and Dot and Fred and the mountain mornings, and those things were not going anywhere, and she could afford to take the new thing at its own pace, and let it arrive when it arrived. She sat in the empty hall with the dark garden through the glass, and she waited, calmly and without anxiety, for whatever was going to happen next. They stood at the window for another minute in the simplest silence they had yet shared. Not the absence of things, but the presence of something that did not need words yet. She said goodnight. He said goodnight. They walked in separate directions. She went to check on Biscuit. He was awake, watching the door with both ears forward, as though he had known she was coming. She sat on the bench along the wall, and told him about the dinner, and about standing up, and about the window afterward. He listened with the equanimity he gave everything. "I don't have the word either," she told him, "but it is something real." He looked at her with one large, certain, entirely untroubled eye. She sat in the stable for a long time, in the hay smell, and the warm quiet of an animal at rest beside her, and she thought about certainty, what it looked like from the inside, how it differed from confidence, why some people had it, and others spent their lives assembling it piece by piece, and never quite finishing. She thought about the uncomplicated certainty Biscuit had, how he simply was what he was, moment to moment, without any apparent gap between what he was and what he showed. No performance of self, just self. She thought, that is what I have been trying to build for 4 years, and I think I am mostly there, and I think being here, in this building, in this situation, with this person, has told me more clearly than anything else I have done recently, that I am mostly there. She thought about what mostly there meant for the specific question she was not yet answering. She thought it meant she was ready for whatever the answer turned out to be. Not that she knew the answer, she did not. But she was ready for it, whichever direction it went, and that was the thing she had been working toward without knowing it, and she was glad it had arrived. She sat in the stable for a long time, his kind of it, the uncomplicated kind that simply existed without defense or explanation, and she thought, that was what she had been building toward, without a map for it, through all the years since she had left the life that worked on paper. She was close. In the days following the dinner, the summit moved toward its close with the efficiency of something that had been prepared for and was now simply happening. The territorial agreements that had seemed intractable in the first week had found their shapes. The Lakemere boundary had been resolved with the quiet completeness of something that had been waiting for the right conversation rather than the right argument. Helen had signed with the composed relief of a representative who had made a decision she could live with, and was glad to have made it. Nadia watched the summit wind down, with the particular feeling of watching something finish that she had not expected to be invested in, and had become invested in anyway. She knew these rooms now. She knew the patterns of them, the people, and their specific ways of being in spaces like this one. She knew which advisors were actually tired, and which ones were performing tiredness as a social signal. She knew which representatives had enjoyed themselves despite everything, and which ones were already calculating the next negotiation. She had learned more about how the world worked at this specific level in 3 weeks than she had in 34 years of not being involved in it. She was in the small library on the ground floor, on the afternoon of the 15th day, when Owen found her and told her that Cyrus was looking for her. She had been there for an hour, reading a book she had found on the shelf, a natural history of the Iron Vale mountain region, old enough to be interesting in its descriptions, which were detailed and specific, and occasionally wrong in the charming way that pre-modern natural histories were wrong. She brought the book with her to the neutral sitting room. "You have been reading," Cyrus said when he saw it. "Your lodge has a good library," she said. "Better than I expected." "My grandfather collected books," he said. "He believed that a place where people made decisions should have books in it. He said it helped people remember that the decisions they were making were not the only decisions that had ever been made." She looked at him. "That is a specific and useful philosophy," she said. "He was a specific and useful man," Cyrus said. She held the book for a moment. Did he run the pack as well? She said. He ran it before my father, Cyrus said. And better, by most accounts, though the context was different, and comparison is always somewhat unfair. He paused. He is the one who told me, when I was young, that being fair was not the same as being liked, and that it mattered more to be fair. How old were you when he told you that? She said. 11, he said. That is a thing to tell an 11-year-old, she said. He was not a person who talked down to children, Cyrus said. He thought it was disrespectful. He paused again. He was right about most things. She set the book down on the table between them. Do you have a library at home? She said. At the main house. A larger one, he said. I find it, he paused, in the way he paused when he was selecting the honest word rather than the easy one. Organizing, he said. To be in a room full of other people's thinking. Yes, she said. I understand that. She did not have a library. She had 2 shelves of books, well read, and a habit of keeping one on the nightstand and one near the kitchen table. But she understood what he meant, the quality of being surrounded by distilled thought, the way it calibrated your sense of scale. She had felt it in bookshops, in the rare periods when she had lived near one worth spending time in. She made a note to herself. When this is over, find a good bookshop. It had been a long time since she had gone to one with real intention. She thought this was either an argument for getting involved in things, or an argument for the educational value of impossible situations. She was not sure which. Marin brought her tea on the final morning before the closing, which was Wednesday, and sat with her for 20 minutes, in the room that had become her room over 3 weeks. The lodge outside the window was very busy, with the particular activity of something that was ending, things being packed and labeled and moved and arranged for transport, the reverse of the organized arrival that had happened 3 weeks ago. Are you glad it is ending? Marin asked. Nadia thought about this honestly. I am glad to go home, she said, and I am not ready for it to be over, which are both true at the same time. That is the right answer, Marin said. When both things are true at once, it usually means you have been somewhere real rather than somewhere comfortable. Nadia looked at the mountain line through the window. It has been real, she said. Yes, Marin said. I could see that from the first week. She set down her teacup. For what it is worth, from someone who has been watching this household for a long time, this has been real on both sides. Nadia said nothing. She looked at the mountain and felt the truth of that sitting in her chest, warm and specific and completely hers. The summit closed on a Thursday. The ceremony was formal and brief. Signatures, statements, photographs, the structured acknowledgement that something significant had been completed. The Lakemere boundary agreement had been finalized 2 days before the close, after the private conversation between Cyrus and Helen that had been building since the second week. Helen had asked for it, which was the outcome Nadia had pointed toward when she first said Helen needed to feel safe, rather than pushed. 3 hours in a side room produced a settlement that was genuinely good for both territories. Drevin signed the final document with the composed efficiency of a man who had played the available game and was now closing the chapter. He had not spoken to Nadia since the dinner 3 days before. She had said good morning to him in the corridor on the final day, because she said good morning to people, and he had returned it with the even courtesy of a man who was already thinking forward. She was not afraid of him going forward. She had not been afraid of him during. This was confirmed information about herself that was worth having. On the morning after the ceremony, she packed with the same practical directness she had used arriving. The green dress and the blue dress she folded and kept, which Marin had told her to do, and which she was honestly glad to do. The books, the lavender soap, the herb kit, Fred's annotated care notes for the animals, with the small notation at the bottom, all fine, even Biscuit. Biscuit loaded into the transport vehicle with the settled dignity of an animal who had concluded his business at this location and was prepared to depart in good order. Marin came out to the vehicle court to see her off. You handled this beautifully, Marin said. I handled it honestly, Nadia said. I am not always sure those are the same thing. For some people they are, Marin said. She looked at Nadia with the warm, precise eyes she had given her from the beginning. He is not simple, she said. I expect you know that already. He is not going to be easy, because easy is not something he has learned to be. But he is reliable in the ways that count, year after year, in the things that actually matter. She paused. I am not telling you what to do. I want you to work with an accurate picture of what you are working with. I think I have an accurate picture, Nadia said. I think so too, Marin said, and embraced her with the brief, firm directness of a woman who said things through how she did them. Cyrus came to the door of the lodge as she was finishing with the vehicle. Working clothes. No convoy. No guards in formation. He stood in the doorway and looked at her with his full, unmanaged attention. She walked to him. They stood facing each other on the steps with the building behind him and the mountain ahead of her. I'll complete the extension, she said. Lena has my contact. If the ratification meeting needs me, I'll come. All right, he said. And then after that, she said. And then after that, he said, holding the space after those words open in the way she had learned to read. Not uncertainty, but the space he made for things that were real. You could call, she said, between now and the meeting, if there were something to say. Yes, he said. Not about the meeting, she said. I understood your meaning, he said, the corner of his mouth. She told him goodbye, the way that goodbye sometimes meant more than goodbye, and she got in the vehicle and did not look back as they drove down the mountain road. She looked forward at the road and the light and the trees, and thought about 3 weeks and what they had built between them, without planning to build it. Fred met her at the gate, held it open with the same calm he brought to everything, and said what needed to be said without adding anything that did not. She drove through and parked, and when she got out of the car and stood in the yard, she noticed that the yard smelled exactly as it had always smelled. Her specific farm, her specific soil, the particular combination of herb garden and animal and mountain air that was, as far as she was concerned, the best smell in the region. She stood in it for a moment, before doing anything else, and simply let it be the first thing. Fred met her at the gate, held it open, and said, Goat's healthy, chicken's fine, fix the garden shed hinge, Dot is ready. Tell her tomorrow morning, Nadia said. 8 o'clock, in order. She unloaded Biscuit. He walked into the yard, with the settled dignity of an animal, resuming his rightful position, looked at everything, and walked into his shed. Same as always, Fred said. Always, she agreed. She spent the afternoon doing what the farm needed. She checked on each goat by name. She fed the chickens, who were entirely indifferent to her absence and return, which she found deeply comforting. She walked the perimeter in the low afternoon light and checked the fences and the herb beds that were ready for attention after 2 weeks of adequate but not optimal tending. She stood in the herb bed with her hands in the soil and felt something that had been held carefully in place for 3 weeks release itself quietly. Home. The first word before all others. This place, this soil, this smell, this view of the mountain line she now knew from 2 windows. She made dinner and called Dot and told her to come at 8 and ask her questions in a sensible sequence. That night, half asleep, her phone lit up. The message was from the number she had added to her contacts on the second day at the lodge. It said, the drive back was longer than I had expected. She looked at the ceiling of her own bedroom. She wrote, the farm looks exactly the same. I find that very reassuring. A pause. Then, I would expect that of you. She smiled at the ceiling. She noted it. Biscuit went directly to his shed, she wrote. No incidents. I am glad to hear it, he wrote. Then, Nadia. She waited. I am not good at this in writing, or in conversation, as you have observed, but I wanted to say something before too much time passed and it became harder to say. She waited. What you said at the dinner, about the beginning and the now being different truths. I have been thinking about those words. I believe you described something accurately that I had not yet found the language for myself. She read this twice. You are better at this in writing than you think, she wrote. I had time to prepare this particular message, he wrote. You compose everything, she wrote. I have watched you for 3 weeks. A longer pause. Is that a complaint? He wrote. No, she wrote. It is an observation. It means you do not say things you don't mean. Neither do you, he wrote. No, she agreed. She lay in her own bedroom, with the sound of the farm outside, and a conversation on the small screen in her hand, and thought, this is a very strange life. She thought it with complete and specific affection for the strangeness of it. 9 days after the closing ceremony, she drove to the ratification meeting. A smaller town an hour north, 6 representatives, a meeting that was completing something already decided. She wore her own clothes and drove her own car, and met Cyrus in the corridor outside the meeting room with the easy, unconsidered naturalness of 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms. "Helen signed this morning," he said. "The full agreement goes through." "Good," she said. They went in. She sat at his left, which she did without thinking, because she had learned where she was in that configuration. The meeting ran efficiently. 3 hours of confirmation, rather than negotiation, the documents signed, the formalities completed properly. Afterward, coffee in the hotel's small dining room. 2 hours of conversation about nothing on any official agenda. About the herb bed she had been working on since she got back, and what she was planting. About a book he had read on the drive, and a question it had raised. About a goat who had been restless, and what it might mean. They talked the way they had learned to talk. Honestly, without performance. Finding the interesting thing, in ordinary subjects, by paying actual attention to it. He walked her to her car. "The arrangement is done now," she said. "Both parts." "Yes," he said. "So anything after this is a different thing," she said. "Yes," he said. He was looking at her with the straight, unmanaged attention that she now read without difficulty. "All right," she said. She got in her car and drove home, thinking about the road, and the morning light, and the long, completely unplanned route that had led from a Saturday market in the summer to a parking lot in a town she had never visited. Dot arrived at the gate at 8:05 the next morning, which meant she had been awake since at least 7:30 and had exercised admirable restraint in not arriving earlier. She sat at Nadia's kitchen table with her tea and asked her questions in a sequence that was not entirely sensible, but was more organized than Nadia had expected, and she listened with the complete attention she gave things she had been waiting to hear for a long time. At the end of it, Dot was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He came to the market." "He did," Nadia said. "In ordinary clothes, in his own car, without a guard that you saw." "Yes," Nadia said. Dot looked at her kitchen table for a moment. Then she said, "Nadia, I have known you for 4 years, and I know that you are not a person who mistakes the shape of a thing for what the thing is. I know you are not going to tell me what any of this means until you know what it means. I just want to say that whatever it is, I am very glad about it." Nadia looked at her across the table. "The donkey started it," she said. "The donkey always starts things," Dot said, without missing a beat. "That is clearly his role. I think he knew what he was doing from the beginning." Nadia laughed, which was something she had not done with full ease in several weeks. The specific laugh of being in your own kitchen, with your own neighbor, and having said the true thing. "I think he might have," she said. She thought it had been worth every mile. The sun was lower by the time she left the town, the kind of afternoon that made mountain roads look their best. Everything cast at a long angle, the shadows distinct, the light on the peaks doing something that warranted the kind of attention she had been trying to remember to give small things. The town she drove through on the way out was the same town she had driven through every week for 4 years, and she looked at it with the specific attention of someone returning from somewhere else and seeing a familiar place with slightly adjusted eyes. The bakery on the corner that she bought bread from every second week, the hardware shop where Fred had his account, the road that led to Dot's house, where Dot was currently almost certainly aware that she had just driven through town, because Dot had a view of the main road from her kitchen window and kept track. She thought about this small town, and about the lodge 20 minutes away on the mountain road, and about the fact that both of them were, in some sense, her world now. The one she had built over 4 years, and the other one that had been added to it over 3 weeks. She did not think the addition was permanent. She thought some version of it might be. She drove home from the ratification meeting along the mountain road, which she now knew well enough that she could stop thinking about the road itself and think about other things while she drove. She thought about the past month, the whole of it, from the market to the convoy, to the farm gate, to the lodge and back. She thought about the shape of a month that had not resembled any other month in her recent life, and that she would not have been able to predict if she had been asked to predict it. She thought about what it said about her that she had said yes to the arrangement. She had told herself at the time that it was the practical answer, the farm, the finances, the bounded 3 weeks, the word asking. All of that was true. But she thought now there had also been something else underneath those reasons, something she had not articulated at the gate on Sunday morning. that she had been curious about the summit, about the world she did not know, about what happened when you stepped outside the edges of your own specific and particular life and tried the shape of something completely different. She had always been curious. She had just been directing the curiosity at herbs and soil and animal husbandry for 4 years, and had perhaps forgotten that there were other things to be curious about. She thought, I am going to keep doing that. Being curious about things outside the borders of what I already know, that is a thing I want to keep doing. The farm came into view at the end of the road as it always did. First the chimney, then the roof, then the whole of it settling into clarity as she came around the last bend. It looked exactly as it always looked. The sight of it was the same reliable quiet in her chest that it had been for 4 years. She pulled in through the gate, cut the engine, and sat for a moment in the car looking at the farm and thinking about the fact that she was home. She thought about all the versions of home she had had. The apartment in the city, which had been home in the functional sense, the place where her belongings were and where she slept, but which had never produced this feeling, this specific quiet in the chest, this sense of the right proportion between herself and the space she occupied. The university house she had lived in with 3 other people, which had been home in the social sense, warm and loud and temporary. The house she had grown up in, which was a different kind of home entirely, the foundational kind, the one that set the template. This was the first home she had made for herself from nothing. That was what produced the quiet in the chest, not comfort, not familiarity, though it was both of those, but the specific knowledge that this place existed because she had built it, from scratch, with her own judgment, and her own hands, and her own stubbornness, and it was hers in the full sense of that word. She sat in the car for another minute. Then she got out and went to feed the goats, because that was what you did when you got home. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, she was at the market. Gerald's stall was 3 rows over. He had not made a sign about donkeys, which she took as quiet progress. Biscuit was tied to the far post, with his ears relaxed, not apparently planning anything, which meant nothing conclusive, but was at least not alarming. Dot was beside her with the thermos. Fred was somewhere in the market buying his Saturday supplies, in the order he always bought them. Everything was as it was, the cobblestones and the mountain light and the bread smell and the Saturday rhythm of people going about their actual lives. Her herbs in their rows, the soap labels in her handwriting, the small painted sign. She sold steadily through the morning. At 10 in the morning, a car she recognized pulled into the lot at the market's edge. She watched from her stall. The door opened. He stepped out in ordinary clothes, dark, simple, nothing announcing itself. He looked around the market the way someone looked at a new place they intended to understand. He found her stall and walked toward it directly. He stopped on the other side of the table. She looked at him. He looked at the herbs in their rows. He looked at the soap labels. He looked at the painted sign. He looked at her. "Hello," he said. "Hello," she said. Dot, beside her, made no sound whatsoever, which was the most eloquent thing Nadia had heard from her in 3 years. "I thought I might see the market," he said. "You have described it." "Several times," she said. "Yes," he said, "in considerable detail." She held out a bundle of dried rosemary across the table. He took it and turned it in his hands, with the genuine, unhurried attention he gave things when he was not performing attention, the real version, the one that meant he was actually here. Biscuit, from his post at the far edge of the market, raised his head and directed both ears toward the stall. He looked at the man standing at the table. He was quiet, not the quiet of an animal preparing something, but the quiet of one that has assessed a situation and arrived at a conclusion. "He is watching you," Nadia said. "I know," Cyrus said. He looked over at Biscuit. Biscuit looked back with the level attention of a creature conducting a final judgment. "He remembers you," she said. "I believe that," Cyrus said. "I remember him." She looked at him across the table of herbs and soap with the mountain morning around them. "You drove a long way for a Saturday market," she said. "I had something to say," he said. "I decided the phone was not the right place for it." "What is it?" she said. He set the rosemary down on the table and looked at her. "I would like to learn how to do this," he said. "The ordinary things, the Saturday market and the farm, and the specific way your days work. I am not going to pretend I know how, or that I will be quick at it. I would simply like to try, if that is something you would consider." She looked at him for a long, unhurried moment, The market moved around them. Dot maintained her extraordinary silence. Gerald sold something 3 rows over. A child ran between 2 stalls laughing. The morning light came through the mountain gap and fell gold across the cobblestones the way it had every Saturday for 4 years. "There is a fence post at my farm that needs replacing," she said. "All right," he said. "And Biscuit's feed needs adjusting in winter. Specific formula, specific schedule. I will show you." "All right," he said. "And you need to understand," she said, "that the farm is mine. That does not change." "I know," he said. "I am not asking for the farm. I am asking to be near it." She held his gaze. "Near it," she said. "Near you," he said. She looked at him for one more unhurried moment, at the face that was more open than she had ever seen it, the composure still present but sitting more easily, less like armor and more like simply how he was built. "Come to the farm tomorrow," she said. "I will show you where the feed is stored." He nodded. Something behind his eyes was quieter than she had ever seen it, the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere they did not know they were heading, and recognize, without needing to be told, as right. "Tomorrow," he said. "And Biscuit," she said, "may or may not accept you. He makes his own judgments." He looked over at Biscuit. Biscuit was chewing something. He looked at Cyrus with one ear tilted in the evaluative angle, conducting his final assessment with the seriousness of a creature who understood his own authority. "I will bring oats," Cyrus said. Nadia thought about explaining that Biscuit could not be bought with oats, that his approval was not something you could plan for, or engineer, that his evaluative system was undecoded, and possibly undecodable. She thought about all of this. She said none of it. Because Biscuit had started this whole thing, on a road in the summer, with a camera flash, and a length of blue ribbon, and the specific, total, magnificent stubbornness of an animal that had never once cared about anyone's plans. And she had learned, over 18 months of owning him, that his outcomes, disastrous and unasked for, and carried out with complete indifference to consequences, had a way of being exactly what was needed, even when no one had known they needed anything. She had not needed a donkey. She had raised her hand anyway, and her life had bent around him in ways she could not have predicted and would not now undo. She had not needed a photograph on a road at the worst possible moment. She had not needed 3 weeks of pack politics and formal dinners and morning walks on mountain paths and honest balcony conversations in the dark. She had not needed any of it. But she looked at the market, and the mountain morning, and the man standing across the table from her, with oats on his mind and a fence post to replace, and she thought, I would not change a single thing about how this went. She thought about the version of herself standing at this same stall 3 weeks ago, before the convoy, and the photograph, and the gate, and the lodge, and all the conversations in between. That version had been fine, genuinely content with her farm, and her Saturdays, and her quiet, specific life. She had built that life with care, and she valued it, and she was going back to it. But she was going back different. Not unrecognizably. Still herself. More herself, perhaps. But she had added things. Knowledge of a world she had not known. The understanding that she could walk into rooms she had never been in, and read them clearly. The specific, accumulated knowledge of a specific person who had turned out to be one of the most genuinely interesting people she had ever spent 3 weeks talking honestly with. She thought, I am going to keep doing this. Being curious about things outside the edges of what I already know. Not leaving the farm was home, and that was certain. But adding things, that was a thing she wanted to keep doing. She looked at Biscuit. He looked back at her with both eyes level and certain, and entirely without apology, and she thought, you knew exactly what you were doing. On that road, blocking that convoy, looking at the lead vehicle with your ears forward like you owned every inch of the mountain. He turned, walked to the end of his rope, and went back to eating his grass. The market moved on around them. Dot drank her tea with the focused discipline of a woman maintaining silence at great personal cost. Fred passed at the market's edge with his Saturday supplies and gave them both a single seeing look and said nothing, which was the most supportive thing Fred knew how to do. Cyrus stood to one side and watched the market with the same careful, unhurried attention he gave everything he wanted to understand. She watched him watching, learning the rhythm of it, the people and the light and the specific quality of a Saturday morning in a small mountain town. She did not interrupt the learning. She had come to understand that he did his best work quietly, in the spaces where nothing required him to perform. At noon she packed her crates. He helped. Without being asked, without making a point of it, in the careful way of someone who does not know the system yet, but is paying full attention, and will know it soon. They walked out together, Biscuit's rope in her hand, the market settling into its midday quiet behind them. It was not a grand beginning. From the outside it looked like nothing more than a woman, and a man, and a donkey, walking out of a Saturday market, into the ordinary light of an ordinary day. Which was exactly what it was. And also, in the way of real things, considerably more. She did not know the shape of what came next. She had never been the kind of person who knew the shape of things in advance. And she had learned, from the farm, from the choice she had made in an auction hall with her hand raised before she had understood why, from 3 weeks in a lodge at the edge of a mountain she could see from her kitchen window, and all the honest, specific, unplanned conversations in between, that not knowing the shape of something before you began it was not a failure of preparation. It was simply how real things began.